I'm going to call to order the meeting of the SHAPE Committee for St. Helena, April 18th. And if we can have a roll call.
In lieu of a roll call, I noticed that the entire committee is here tonight.
Okay. Next on the agenda would be public comments for anything to the SHAPE Committee that's not on the agenda tonight. And what tonight's agenda is to actually go through all of our, or go through as many of the properties as we can get through and try to refine some of the alternatives and options that have been laid out in the previous meeting. So if somebody has something else they'd like to address the SHAPE Committee on, feel free to come up. Okay, I'll close public comment. And then we're on to new business, which is refining the options of the SHAPE Committee recommendation for the city facilities and assets. And the way we're going to sort of go through these is we'll go through them one property at a time, and we will end up, the committee will chat about it, and then we'll open it up for public comment, and then the committee will sort of do a final wrap-up on the property after we get the public comments, and then we'll move on to the next property and do the same thing. Okay? So Gene's going to help process this.
I think we need a broader conversation before we jump into it again.
Okay.
It'd be nice if each of us could talk about the impressions that we have, because we've gone over each.
We need you to speak into the microphone.
We've gone over each individual parcel, and I think that since ideas have been expressed that some of us haven't thought of before, it's probably worth having another just broad context conversation to see if anybody's viewpoints have evolved or if there's more common ground than just going kind of analytically project to project.
Okay, you want to start it off?
Yeah, sure. Here. You told us to do some homework. I threw together some thoughts before we came, and I only cover 3 of the properties, but I'll just read this maybe as a starter. Fundamentally, everyone's goal seems to be to maintain St. Helena's small-town character into future generations. In order to do so, it has to be considered what ultimately is the root of that character. Pat, forgive me for using that word.
Yes,
What do you want me to say? Go ahead.
Ambiance.
If it is a city hall on Main Street, updated city parks, and a shiny new community center, then Yountville would meet that standard in spades. Yet most people would agree that Yountville has long since lost its small-town distinction. I would suggest that it is the existence of families, permanent residents, and small local businesses that contribute most to a viable small town. However, high commercial rental rates and high residential real estate costs are making it more and more difficult for small businesses and full-time families to financially sustain life here. It is their loss that will eventually lead to St. Helena becoming just another tourist town, not the addition or not of one more hotel or a city hall on Main or 2 blocks off. So the greater question for this committee becomes, what can the city do with their assets to address these problems? In regard to commercial space, it can attempt to control rates or subsidize merchants, or it could utilize a property to construct a city-owned, profitable yet reasonably priced market for small independent stores. The existence of additional rent-controlled commercial spaces could also have the effect of driving down rental rates on the privately owned spaces by simply increasing the overall supply. In addition, the city could consider providing co-worker environment for residents working remotely, small business grants, artist studios, a food truck park, etc., to add to a vibrant mix of businesses and both support and sustain citizens. Rather than taking the myopic view of the city's assets as individual items and limiting our contribution to a reflection of how to negotiate the EMG report, I would suggest we take a broader view of what we can propose to the City Council that will bring some creative direction and reasoning to an otherwise mediocre landscape of city assets. City Hall. We're all in agreement that City Hall is in need of significant renovations or replacement. Renovating the existing structure to the tune of a few million will simply waste assets on freezing a very poor building in time, as a reflection of our inability to make wise progressive decisions that help shape the architectural fabric of our town. Rebuilding a new City Hall in its current position on Main Street will be an expensive endeavor and limits its programming to the current use and function with no added benefit to the community other than a new building. The idea of City Hall being a reflection of civic pride is a point well taken, but taking action on this point alone is foolish. A great number of current library visitors are using it for work, for the library for work, access to Wi-Fi, and to use computers. A relocation of City Hall to the library building would afford the opportunity to incorporate this use and maintain it as a part of City Hall programming with free access to viable open-plan workspaces, along with an incorporation of private spaces for phone conversations, etc. City Hall in this location is an opportunity to break the paradigm of what City Hall is to its community and create a beautiful space for our employees and citizens at a fraction of the cost of building a new building. The current library building can be amended, removing bump outs that detract from its agrarian setting, thus reducing its square footage. This smaller square footage is still more appropriate for our needs and places our City Hall in a position to be a reflection and celebration of our agrarian roots as a community. This move also conveys a message to our citizens and our visitors that we are proud of our town. This fiscally responsible move will allow us to take other city-owned assets out of a state of perpetual mediocrity and aid developing them into assets that reflect sophistication rather than neglect. Library. The city is fortunate enough to have a wonderful asset in the library building that was created and is primarily maintained through the generosity of others. The building currently has an incredible asset in the St. Helena Public Library Friends and Foundation. This group recently posted a letter in the local newspaper outlining its concern over the discussions surrounding the library building. This letter also spoke to the multitude of programs the library currently promotes and houses. Modern-day libraries are not only institutions of learning, but also de facto community centers, and our library is no exception. Unfortunately, the library building is completely ill-suited to house the programs it's promoting. Rather than being a beacon of learning with pastoral vineyard setting, it feels more of confinement than openness, and with no access to the outdoors, it isolates patrons and holds no relation to its surroundings. The librarians complain of the disruptions of diverse programming that ultimately take away from the functions of the library as a space for contemplation and thought. The mission of the library is extremely valuable and exciting. The current building, however, is unable to fully support its mission and is in fact doing it a disservice. Grant money can easily be had for libraries incorporating mixed community support. Grant money for a new city hall cannot. I would argue that the library as a de facto community center is a modern-day best and highest use, and that the library programming is deserving of a higher standard of architectural programming that properly serves its contemporary standard. I moved here from Seattle, a municipality that in 1998 passed a $200 million bond measure to update all its libraries throughout the city. Rather than taking a prescriptive approach, the city held neighborhood-based community forums to determine proper architectural programming of individual libraries. This approach was hugely successful. Even without a community forum, it is simply fact that the library building is not designed for its current multitude of uses. Our town's library needs to reflect its contemporary use. It does not. It was built in 1979 when a library had a very different use. What else fits people's lives and ways of living in 1979 that doesn't fit now? The letter from Friends and Foundation brought up many important points: community contribution, diverse programming, and visits per capita. Clearly, there are a number of people passionate about the library and want best for it. When I read these statements, I don't see them as reasons for keeping the library in a building that doesn't properly serve its needs. I see them as reasons to give the diverse library program that we already have a standing in the 21st century that will carry us the next 100 years. The library was moved from the Carnegie building because the building no longer fit its needs. Carnegie built the building as a library with the expectation that it would stay one. Today, his legacy is no less celebrated because his gifts evolved to different uses. The contributions of those individuals who contributed to our current library should be no less celebrated. They should be honored by recognizing the success of the library programming, not by limiting the library's potential for the future by making the mistake of tying an important legacy to a structure. A modern-day library for this community needs proper, flexible programming space along with space for its collection. This is not a cultural center, but a space for a community that supports a diverse range of uses. A new library building on the City Hall property incorporated into the park is a perfect setting for a pavilion-style library building with open-air exposure to the park and an incorporated flex community space for its diverse range of events. It allows the library to become a central part of town and incorporate more community needs. It's also an endeavor that would be much less expensive than developing a brand new city hall. Signorelli Barn. This is the one city-owned asset that truly reflects our genuine agrarian heritage. It should be cherished and, as such, used in a way that reflects our respect for our heritage. Reconstruction of the barn for adaptive reuse within our current cultural context is the best and highest use for the structure. I would argue there is high value both philosophically, culturally, and civically to use the structure as a meeting and event space for city functions in conjunction with theater, dances, vendors, etc. The building is a part of Miley Park, and the path linking the barn to the park can be utilized accordingly. Although the layout of the parking lot is tight, it could easily be amended to comfortably accommodate 2 rows of parking. There are contemporary building practices that would make the reconstruction of the barn a completely feasible endeavor. Furthermore, this is a property that is perfectly set up for financing beyond the city coffers by way of grants and philanthropy. I'm almost done. Adams Street. The development of Adams Street is obviously a contentious issue driven by the preconceived notion of an all-or-nothing approach. Its value as green space is an obvious one. However, its potential as a civic asset in a hotel partnership should not be ignored and can be far more beneficial in the long run. Many of our residents argue that the property needs to be conserved as green space and that they use the property regularly. However, this statement is not completely accurate, as the land that is accessed at the end of the pavement is in fact the parcel slated for the Hunter Development Project, and the land adjacent the river, yet another parcel. As a municipality, we have the opportunity to craft a proposal based on ethical, integrated, and intentional visioning that can create a world-class hotel destination we can be proud of. We have the unique opportunity as a world-class destination that draws visitors to our region regardless of our town's efforts. Capturing those visitors in an appropriate way to contribute to our town should be a high goal. Our opportunity to use a portion of Adams Street for a revenue source could expand our town within the ethical guidelines of green space preservation and create a platform for cultural development that can entice visitors to stay and contribute to both our economy and our civic endeavors. The act of securing a business partnership as a revenue source from the Adams Street land we currently own puts us in a position to gain the revenue needed to buy back the Hunter Development parcel. This would allow both parties to avoid years of expensive litigation and preserve the land for a more acceptable use within the community. The next parcel to the east, immediately adjacent to Napa River frontage, is directly within the FEMA flood zone. It currently has no agricultural development and is not protected by the levee project. It is not developable as a building parcel, and due to its falling within the flood zone, has very limited possible uses. It is, however, perfectly situated for a beautiful city park and dedicated green space with immediate river frontage. This park could be tied into Wapo Park, another little utilized city asset, via a walking path along the levee, and create sophisticated river frontage that would be a wonderful contribution and asset to our town. Adams Street is 5.6 acres of highly valuable land. Hunter Parcel is 16.9 acres of land primarily atop levee infill with little value outside entitlements. The parcel at the river is 15.69 acres of undevelopable land. Isn't a few acres of Adams Street worth the potential of 32.59 acres of usable city space that draws the town to the river in a sophisticated way?
Thank you.
Comments?
Comments?
This is the approach. I applaud. I don't agree with everything that Joshua suggested, but I certainly agree with the approach that we've ignored from the beginning, which is we should look holistically as opposed to individual building, because just trying to figure out what to do with the City Hall project parcel, for instance, means that if you move the City Hall, you don't just say, we're going to move it. You have to say, what are we going to do with the property that's left underneath it? And if you're going to move it, or if you're going to build on that same property, you have to say, how can we sell another property or lease another property to pay for it? Everything's interrelated, and we ought to have a big picture view, yet from the very beginning we've gone to individual buildings. And you can't really talk about an individual building without talking about all the other buildings in town, or at least many of them, and how they're reflected upon one another. And I think that's where we're going to end up, where we want to be, even if we have to go backwards and start again one more time with individual buildings.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think that's a natural progression, that what will come out of talking about the individual buildings, though, you'll see the linkage. And I think we've already seen some of the linkage. I mean,
right.
When we've been talking about certain properties, we've seen how one tumbles into the other one and the domino effect and whatnot. So it's a rough approach. It's the approach we've been using, but I think the expectation of the public is that we're going to talk about the properties. I think we still need to walk through them all, and hopefully as we, get there, we'll refine some of them, and some I think will be easy, and some will be a little bit more difficult, and they'll be tied together. But again, I think we decided long ago for everybody to plop down their own vision was going to be a pretty arduous task, especially for some of us. So we did pick to go through it the way we did, and we can all we all have our own opinions on each property and how to get there, and I'm sure that it'll come up.
Yeah.
I think that could be valuable to the city council.
What's that?
Our own individual opinions. I think what they're looking for is a multitude of creative options. I would propose that perhaps each of us draft a small report of our own, and the committee as a whole comes together to propose a few options that are more complete from a holistic standpoint as it comes to financing, and that we can argue and come to consensus with. Just putting it out there.
I don't know. Anybody else have some opinions on this subject before
I just have a question, and that is the Adams Street property. When you were discussing that, I heard hotel. I'm familiar with your comments about the library building and that. But then you went on to make some, what I thought were some generalized comments about community, and I really didn't follow kind of what would be there besides a hotel and the library building, or some modification of that building, and then some green space. So could you develop that a little bit for me?
Well, I think it's a non-starter to say, obviously, based on what's happened in the past, that we should take 5.6 acres and hand it over to a hotel development. I think that maintaining the library as a civic asset and a city hall that has multiple uses, we need a buffer from that civic asset and the portion of the parcel that's directly south of the library, and another bit of land to the east to save for future use for potential civic assets. It's hard to say what that might be in the future, but I don't think it makes sense to let it all go, and we can land bake it and or develop it as another community use.
Okay. Thank you.
I was sort of hoping, I agree with Mark, I was sort of hoping we could go through the assets one by one. I think that the paper that you've written is extremely thoughtful, and I think you have some really good ideas. Some of your ideas I would challenge. I know that the land that you're proposing east of the levee, which is called Terrace B of the flood control project, no way that could ever become a city park. That was part of an extensive engineering study to achieve flood control. It's been designed in a way that has large woody debris, has certain kind of plants in it that are amenable to a floodplain terrace. and the whole purpose of that was to widen the river. And I am absolutely certain, as I sit here, that the idea of making that into a city park could never fly.
I would disagree, but that's okay. That's
Well,
why we're here.
I lived with this for 10 years,
Sure.
Joshua, and I understand it fairly well. And I can also tell you that I would hate to see. I'd love to see the city buy the Hunter property back again, and have some more passive use for it than housing. But I don't know. What was your idea for getting the money to do that?
Develop a portion of Adams Street.
Well, I think we need to develop a portion of Adams Street for civic uses. And I certainly think Doug's idea of a community cultural center will produce some good revenue. And I would see,
Wouldn't you rather have that on 16 acres than 4?
well, you be a little bit more explicit. So what you're saying, sell some of Adams Street in order to get the money to buy the Hunter property. Is that what you're saying?
Use it for debt financing. That's what I'm saying.
And then you put the cultural center on the Hunter project?
If the vision comes to fruition and someday we have the audience for it, then sure.
I don't know. I think that's very complicated. I'd just like to see us go through
Well,
the assets.
if I can jump in just for a second, I do know it's the expectation of City Council that we go through these property by property. The report group met with Paul and Mary, who are the liaisons to the City Council, and they gave us some a little bit more direction and guidance and whatnot. And they do want to hear a discussion of each property. With the varying ideas and whether we coalesce around certain ideas on certain properties, and then offer up, options to them, as well as, what all the various financing options are. Because once it gets to City Council is going to have their own opinion of everything, and I'm going to make a wild guess that you'll probably also get more public input once we've gone and proposed more things to City Council and refined some of this stuff. So I think we do have to, go ahead. It's great. Obviously you put a lot of work into it. I have my own, grand vision of things as well, but I think we could probably end up with 11 grand visions, and then we probably wouldn't be delivering anything to City Council. So I think we have to go through property by property and see how it progresses. And, we probably got a few meetings of doing this, and we can then coalesce around some grand visions, I think.
Could I just describe what Mark and I talked about for the process tonight, just to see if that would fit your needs? So what we thought is that as we've looked at all of the information you had to date, there's probably a chunk of these properties that are not connected with the other ones, that they can be standalone and they're fairly simple. You don't have a lot of options for them. So what we thought is we'd start with some of those, see if they are indeed fairly simple, and that we can shift, for example, the public corporations yard. So to talk about some of those. And then what you have clearly done every step of the way is to say there's a number of these that fit with each other and that they are packages. There was never an intent to limit that. That has actually been given probably more airtime on this committee than any other individual project. So the next point would be to start with some of those and to really talk about them. Really, and truly to do that in broad concepts, not in the weeds of exactly what would be designed, but is it a cultural center, a civic center, where would it go? And what would be connected to that? Those kinds of things. But the idea is to try and whittle it down, so there might be some properties, assuming that there really are some that you just want to fix and leave them the same way that they are. Maybe I'm wrong, but what we thought was we'd start with those and see if that's accurate, and then move into the mix, the bigger plans. Again, not assuming that there would be one recommendation, but that you would have a number of them that you would send to City Council, not assuming that you would all agree on everything. It's pretty clear that there are very different ways of approaching this, which is fabulous and exactly what you want. And here's the other piece of the timing on this, and that was always the challenge. How are we going to get from these great big ideas and all of these pieces of property and assets into some recommendations that the City Council can work with? And so that's what we've been trying to move to. The other piece is that we were asked to start focus groups right after this meeting with the idea of hopefully whittling down and having those focus groups talk about some of the details of the recommendations. We have twice as many people signed up for focus groups on the second round as we did the first round. Thank you. That is largely due to your recommendations and some of the other folks here. So there's over 70 people that will be in groups between tomorrow night, tomorrow afternoon, and Sunday afternoon. So we would like to have something consolidated for them, if at all possible. I don't want that to limit your work, but the hope was that we could maybe get some of these buildings taken care of tonight and then talk about those broader concepts and what your linkages are and see if we can even whittle down some of those. That was the intent for tonight. Would that fit with and kind of fit with what you're saying you want to do too? I don't know. Please.
I have a clarifying question about that. So we'll go through each of the properties one by one first and do all of them and then come back and talk about linkages and grand visions, or we're going to mix those two together as we're going through? Right.
We've picked out six of them that we assume can be fairly standalone. We'll start with those. If any of them need to be pulled out and put into packages, they will be. But to just see if we can at least get those kind of off the table and then move forward with the stuff that's really in play for you. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I agree completely with sort of separating the one-offs from the linked ones, and I did the same thing. I actually have 6 one-offs too. They might not be the same as your 6, but I at least have 6. So I like that. It was just unclear, how are we going to form the grand visions? Are we going to try to whittle down what's feasible on City Hall first and then come back to it? But it sounds like we're going to do it all as one sort of.
The hope is to take the 6, maybe possibly low-hanging fruit first, and then begin to talk about the packages.
Okay.
And what are the 6?
Well, the ones.
Start them one by one.
I'd just like to hear the 6, and then go from there.
Okay.
The ones that I have is the Public Works Corporation Yard, the fire station, the Head Start building, Scouts Hall, Lyman Park, and Signorelli Barn.
I would agree with 4 of those.
Those were my 6 too. Though I had some caveats with a couple that said.
I wouldn't agree with the fire station, and I think the courtyard
Can
may
we
be a little
really?
bit more
We can.
complicated.
Okay. But we're going to end up talking about all the buildings anyway. Yeah. So let's kind of get the party started, I think, if we can. Well,
Okay, and then.
Could I make? Oh, sorry. Quick follow-up comment to Joshua's thoughtful piece, and thank you very much. I think probably all of us, some of us definitely, have expressed the interest in, at some level, having a holistic and a synergistic outcome here with some of the properties, and maybe it's percolated to the surface already, but it seems like there are some key functions and community features and activities that are necessary in the overall formula. For example, library and gathering spaces, something with Wi-Fi and some high-tech workspaces, et cetera, the civic government functions. It seems like if we had there's a nexus, it seems like, between the strategic, holistic vision and how that integrates, and then the more grassroots level of each individual building, but as you look at the parcels in their whole, in context together, have we addressed key community priorities that have floated to the surface? I'm not expressing this real well, but do we have some key components or community functions and priorities, maybe a half a dozen, that we could bench against the overall solutions and make sure that those are covered? Some of the things that Joshua talked about. Am I being obtuse, or is that clear?
No, I think you're right. I mean, that's what we were supposed to do, was benchmark every alternative that we came up with against the criterion principles we had. So hopefully that's what everybody has done when they went back and looked at all the alternatives that existed.
Yeah.
And then, so my hope and my vision is that, or my hope is that it will come together. I think it'll start to crystallize, and there's some properties that, are sort of interrelated. And they'll come out. We can't forget also, it's not just what we here, the 11 here, up here, think. It's, hopefully people went back and looked at the focus group information. Hopefully they went back and looked at the workshop information. Because this is about what the community wants. This isn't about what the 11 of us want. So hopefully, we're going to use that information and the criterion principles that were developed partially also from workshop and focus group information, and we'll be true to that.
I thought it was a very good tool. I went through. I did have Cindy print these 13 pages for me about 10 days ago, and I went through and used the criteria, and I actually changed my mind about a couple of things, and it's not easy for me to change my mind. So I found this a very useful tool. And it does actually stand what you're talking about, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Let's start rolling.
Can we weigh in on these?
Well, I will. I'll start.
Well, we were going to start with one building.
Property.
Right.
The smaller one. So which
Right.
one are you going to start with?
Well, I went by what was on those papers that we got, and I went one by one. So I will go to Head Start. So what I did was I went to the Head Start, what it had on the options and criteria. And so I put for Head Start, it was option 2 and 3 that I liked, that I thought was a complete rebuild for Parks and Rec, and use it for admin and classes and the Head Start summer programs, and have the building a mixed use, perhaps for the food part that we were talking about, maybe part of that somewhere in that. And so the criteria that I used was it was a safe environment for children, and it improves gathering space for children at Crane Park. So when I went through all this and did this, that's all I thought we were supposed to be taking from what the papers that we got from you. So that's what I got for Head Start.
And let's just make sure and go around to everybody on Head Start.
Should we, at some point, ask questions? So if you want to add another building to that, how big, what specifically is in there? Have you talked to the rec department? Do they want that? Can we ask those questions so we can help define what
I think
we're
we should
dealing
let
with
everybody,
here?
because I addressed some of
Well,
that.
I think what we need to do is we need to go through,
Everybody-
and then we're
Yeah.
going to also
Go
get
around.
public
Yeah.
comment, and then we're going to come back and refine it. So maybe
Right.
some of the question and answer stuff maybe happens in the second round.
And I think there's another point, and we're balancing some polarities here, because you need enough to say, oh, this is an idea I want to go, but we can't get into the weeds too much, because that's not really what the committee is going to be asked to do. There would be, the next steps would be architects and, financial
But
planning,
aren't
all
we
that
being asked to
stuff.
define what goes in a building if we're going to build a new building? We're just going to say build a
Absolutely.
building?
Yeah.
Aren't we supposed to
Yeah. I
describe the
just want to-
size of that, the cost of that,
Okay,
how we'll
could-
pay for that? Isn't that
Could
all
I go
part of it?
next?
Sure, I was just asking
Yeah.
a question.
Go, yeah.
Sorry.
May I go next?
Sure.
Jeez.
I think number 2 and number 4 are practically the same thing.
Can you state what
Okay,
2 and 4?
Number 2 is complete rebuild for parks and recreation. And number 4 is remodel and add building for parks and recreation. But it contains the number A, or letter A is modular structures. So I guess I would go with number 2. And I found that ensured efficient use and functionality. It improved community meeting and gathering space. It was a safe working environment for the employees of the Parks and Recreation Department. It anticipates future needs by having a building large enough that it can expand into new programs. It ensures the maintenance of those facilities because they're brand new. It's family friendly. It minimizes traffic impacts. There's plenty of places to park in that area. A safe community honors. It facilitates biking and trails because maybe a lot of children using Parks and Rec will come in on their bicycles to that facility. Considers economic and ethnic diversity. I say that because what I'm proposing is to tear down the cinder block structure, to rebuild it using modular construction at about 3,000 square feet. If I'm looking at Jeff because he looked at the property, I don't know if there's that much room there, but he said there was additional room. And I did my best to try to find out what modular construction is, and I think it's around $150 a square foot, which would come out to, we'd save $113,321 by not doing the repairs that they suggested. And then if we use 3,000 square feet times $150 a square foot, it would cost $450,000. But we'd have a 3,000 square foot brand new building that would have more than adequate space for the 3 offices for the director and the 2 employees of the department. It would have enough space that whatever goes on in Carnegie Hall right now could be done in that building. It would have enough space. Many of those programs wouldn't take place in the summer. I feel very strongly about the Head Start, the camp, whatever they call it, being able to go forward, because we have a lot of lower income people in our community who depend on that in the summer when their children are out of school as a sort of a babysitting service and something innovative for their children to do. So that's my plan. And yes, Doug, it does include space, the size of the building, and what it would cost to build it.
It's great. It's great.
I just want to make sure I understood. Did you say it was going to be $150 a square foot to build it?
With modular construction, that's the best number I could get.
What is modular construction?
Well, they build it in a factory. It still has a foundation. It's not like a mobile home because they don't have
like those
a
blue
foundation.
houses. Yeah.
You still have to build a foundation and all, but it's built in the factory. You tell them what you want,
Gotcha.
and then they just bring the walls and put them up. Very, very popular construction right now, particularly in the fire areas. They're using a lot of, over in Santa Rosa, they're using a lot of modular construction.
Who's next?
I'll go next because I agree with Pat. I had very similar thoughts, and I talked to Park and Rec, and they do like that site not as it is. They don't want to leave where they are and go there as it is, but if it's completely redone, it's a nice, simple building. They do need more space. They need 4 times the room that's in Carnegie for the programming that they want to do to serve not only the youth of the community, but all ages. They have a lot of ideas and things that they would like to expand. They didn't think it was too far away. They felt like it was still walking distance from the schools or bikes, or people were able to get there. They like the idea that it's connected to the park. So other than, I was open to the idea of making where they have better, or this is a possible site, and I think that we still would have to work with staff and what they would want to do. But I think more that site to me seems to make sense with the park. Same thing. I think you need to keep the summer programming and then just make sure that the space is used for the whole community all year long. I think when it does rain in town, it would be nice to have somewhere indoor to go, some projects, something that could be done through the Park and Recs. I also think I like Doug's cafe idea, but in thinking about it, I wondered if there wasn't a way to do it so that we couldn't partner with the CIA and get some chefs that are just newly out to do some kind of food truck or something with somebody through, whether it's the farmer's market, something that helps people out that are starting. I was thinking if we couldn't as we're looking at the city buildings, not look for partnerships that help people that are starting out and that aren't already established and have a lot of money.
That's a good idea.
So I would like, I mean, couldn't you have, there's certainly cafe trucks, like just have a van, go to the CIA, see what they would do with us, or some chef that's there, and have it be a more simple part that parks there with the Park and Rec.
Can you clarify what the Parks and Rec folks meant by they need 4 times the space
That's
of
a
Carnegie?
room. So there's the room
4
that's used
times
for
the room.
karate
Okay.
or for used for other programming, and they just need a bigger size. I've been in there with all the kids. They do.
Okay, I was envisioning
The
a
kids don't have
20,000
enough room
square
to do
foot.
what they're doing.
Do you
Yeah.
think 3,000 square feet's enough?
I don't know. I'm not good with space like that. So we'd have to ask them and see.
I'm not really either. So.
I don't know.
All right, I'll go next. I don't have a lot to add because I'm agreeing with the 3 of you quite a lot. It's kind of funny. I estimated 3,000 square feet when I was doing it. I took a guess at $300 a square foot because it was $600 for a municipal building, and I thought, well, maybe it's half of that. So I don't know what the number is there, but that still comes in at under $1 million for a brand new building. In terms of the choices, I like Suzanne, the mixed use, put Parks and Rec in there with a nice new building with multiple uses. And I like the ideas about trying to add some sort of food function there, concessions, food trucks, whatever. I think it would be great in that setting to have some food options for all the people that use the park over there. We could get some additional revenue from that in terms of leasing it to whomever's using it. Maybe even some help with some aspect of building the building. If we get a more of a permanent restaurant in there, they might be willing to chip in on the space that they're going to use at least. So I'm in violent agreement with what people have said up to this point.
I'll jump in if I can. Number 1 was the proposal that I made about the cafe. My thinking on this was that this is a building that's part of our mandate is to look at the buildings, see if they're underutilized or overutilized, like the City Hall, which has people in the hallways, or underutilized, like the Head Start building that's used for basically a few weeks in the summertime, and otherwise it's an empty building and has become dilapidated. And I think the price tag on fixing that up is about $115,000, if I'm remembering correctly, just to get it to be serviceable again for that few weeks in the summertime that the Head Start's there. Head Start's a really vital program. It's really important. It needs to be moved, I think, if we do what I'm suggesting here, to another place, not shut down, because it's really an important, even though it's a very limited amount of time. It doesn't need a building for itself for the entire year to sit empty. And the other mandate is that we should try to do these things for not too much negative financial exposure, so that if we have an opportunity to do it, get that $114,000 fix-up and put something in there that's going to be valuable to the city, we had to think about that. And it might be valuable to the city in terms of both a gathering place and a place that actually generates income for Park and Rec. So my concept was that it would be turned into out of the farmstead outdoor coffee bar that they have over there, something pretty simple, and that a local restaurant like Gott's would or Farmstead or Model Bakery would then service the food for that. It'd be coffee and not prepared in an industrial kitchen in the place, but be brought in with the vans in the morning, and they'd serve the kind of things that you see at the Farmstead Cafe, snacks and coffee, and after school in the afternoons, and after sporting events, and in the early morning after the drop-offs at the primary school, and then at the high school as well. So it'd be a place people could gather while they're playing bocce, while they're doing tennis. And so I went to Parks and Rec, and I asked the Parks and Rec people how many people went there, and Andre did a good deal of work to take a look at it, and it turned out to be 118,000 people roughly a year, plus the high school, which is another 80 to 100,000. So the audience for this would be about 200,000 people a year. And if it were Gott's that made it not Gott's Roadside, but Gott's Parkside, then people would eventually hear about it, and they'd come there too. And if we asked them to develop that property into this little community cafe in the park, and we forgive the rent for the first 3, 4, 5 years, doing the numbers on it, then it would cost us nothing to fix it up. And then we would, when we start collecting rent, we might be able to generate, say, half of Main Street rent's $5,000, $6,000 a month, and we could generate maybe $60,000 or $70,000 a year earmarked for Parks and Rec, And it seemed like a good idea if we did it that way. I have not heard from Parks and Rec that they want to not be in the city hall, that they'd rather be in a park, and I haven't heard from them either that they're looking for specific new building and have defined what they want it for. And it seems to me that if they were, in fact, in need of that, they're in Carnegie now, and they're in the elementary school, and they're in the Boys and Girls Clubs, but the Catholic school is going to be empty, and if there's a potential leasability for more than 3,000 square foot building there to put all of Parks and Rec programming there that's much closer to all three schools, walking distance, biking distance from all of them as opposed to the other side of Crane Park. So that's the concept here, is that it'd be basically free to the city and generate income for the city and be a gathering place for the city.
Which of the criteria did it meet?
Well, I went through all of them, and some of them didn't make much sense to it. Family-friendly obviously does make sense, but then high-quality aesthetics, we would assume that whoever does this would do high-quality aesthetics. Actually, I asked Joel Gott if he'd run some numbers on it, which he's in the process of doing now, and see if it's even viable. I mean, it's speculative, as are so many of these ideas. So if, in fact, the numbers would work, then it'd be something for the city council to take a look at. If the numbers come back and he said, nah, that'll never fly, then something to throw off the table, and then you can go directly to one of these other ideas.
I'll go. The current Head Start building it's basically junk. I think that putting money into renovating it is a waste. It's kind of a common theme, and I think it's easy to get stuck in the idea, well, that's where the building is, so that's where another building would need to be. And that's certainly not the case. There's a lot of area there to develop something that would be appropriate for Parks and Rec. And, whether the food is viable or not, great. But I would go with effectively 2 or 3 as options. I'm in agreement with.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that the Head Start program needs to either stay where it's at or be moved somewhere else, but be accommodated. I think the Parks and Rec, to be at the park, not a bad idea. Having a newer building there is a good idea in the longer term. This isn't a hot potato item or we got to have it tomorrow kind of item, so it'll be nice to have some additional time to think about what's most appropriate for that space, where it would be, how it would be used. I prefer the concept of having a food truck there to maybe almost be like a test of the waters for the viability of a restaurant concept. Maybe we could install some type of small commissary kitchen within the new building that would help accommodate the food trucks. But I think the space itself, Josh, like you mentioned, I don't think we don't need to take our money and put it into that. I think there are a lot of other places we need it before that, and to look at a long-term solution for Parks and Rec to have their home there, and to think about what that 3,000 square feet might look like, whether it's modular, stick-built, whether it's high ceiling, low ceiling, whether it's a rectangle or a square. I think we can get through all that. But for right now, I think it's safe to say we don't need to put any money into it. We can move Parks and Rec over there with some upgrading if it helps them become happier over there and happy employees, and keep Head Start there for the short term, and then work on a long-term building strategy over there. So,
just a word about the financials. If the CD, everything does have to tie together. I don't care, even if it's the Head Start building. If we didn't repair the CDF building and the teen center, and gave that some other function, that's $227,368 on the CDF building, and that's $45,624 that we save on the teen center. That money could be used to build this.
Agreed. Spend good money on good things, right? Don't throw good money after bad that you're just going to be chasing and have to try to get your money out of later on, or it's lost.
So, Jeff, let me just double check. You're saying you're really not for any of these 3, just leave it.
Well, I'm saying for the time being, in terms of the next 36 months, I don't know that this is an item that needs to be handled. I think we have other buildings that are in more dire need of better answers, and to take our resources and put it into those. Okay. I just think of this as if this were my home, if these were all parts of my house, what would I work on first? Is it the kitchen? Is it the bathroom? Is it the living room? Is it the shed out back? clearly you want to have the main part of the house working first, and to me, that's City Hall. I think the Public Works yard needs some help. That's the bathroom with a leaky roof. I mean, you got to fix those things today. And then as we generate income, as we look to possibly pass property taxes or sell off or lease a portion of railroad or whatever that might be, then we can allocate resources in a more fiscally responsible manner so we don't paint ourselves in a corner by going out and redoing the whole house and realizing, oh, heck, we can't afford the payments anymore, right? So
Jeff, if I can jump in
thank you.
for a second. So I guess to try and get to one of these four alternatives we had, so at that point in time, when the city thinks we have the financial capability, what would you do with Head Start?
Number 2.
Okay. I think that's really what your opinion is. I mean, at some point in time, this is what you would do to it, and obviously, it's all going to have to come together with finances. So if we have the finances, or if it's 5 years from now, we have the financial wherewithal, that's what you would do: is completely rebuild it and use it for Park and Rec.
So
Absolutely.
I think some of these timing questions are really important, and they're worth discussion. But one thing to not overlook is if we're thinking we're going to delay doing anything substantial to the Head Start property, what do you do in the next 5 years? Do you leave it a total dump, or do you pour repair costs into it to keep it limping? So I don't have an answer to that, and I don't expect you to have one, but I think it's a consideration for some of these timing issues.
Having looked pretty carefully at that building, you can't go near the bathrooms. They're so vile. So I think it's
You're
a
talking about the outside ones?
The outside ones, for
They've
sure.
abandoned them.
I know they have, but
Yeah.
they haven't abandoned the smell, because it's certainly there. And the roof is in terrible shape. So I think it's not a building that could go without some kind of repair, even to keep Head Start and do nothing else there.
But aren't the Head Start people, the summer camp, they're using the inside bathrooms, and those are adequate for the only function that's happening there right now is the summer camp, the Head Start summer camp, and the inside bathrooms are adequate for that. So, and Parks and Rec can function where they are for now until something is decided about the railroad property.
You could spend a few $1,000s, not 10, just a few, dress that building up enough so that it's comfortable for the Head Start program, and you're not rejuvenating it to an original state like EMG says.
I think we should do that. I mean, every parent I talk to, myself included, if you take your kid there, you sort of, oh boy, like it would be good to spend a couple $1,000s there for the summer.
It's ghastly, yeah.
Still have 3 or 4 of you that have not weighed in on this building.
Glenn?
No, it's not my intention to. It's not my intention to offer any thoughts on this building. The discussion has been good, and I think you've all covered it.
Thank you. Stan?
I tend to agree with what's been said. I wanted to find out if we could, for a minimum cost, as Josh said, rehab the cinder block rectangle that's there now and use it, let it be a stout space for certain uses, maybe youth games or meetings or youth parties, something like that. But I think it's important that another space be added, as Pat said, perhaps modular construction. I think it would be a logical location for the Parks and Rec offices to be. And then in addition to that, in some new space, something along the lines that Ann was talking about and others for programs that should be in a much nicer space with appropriate square footage. And if there were a new structure, I think if it were in general proximity of the existing structure I think it's cinder block, to me, logically, that makes some sense, but not priority. But I do think it would be worth investing in another, second building of some size for Parks and Rec offices and youth programs. And I like the idea of the food truck. So I think I'm also in general agreement. But I think those are all good ideas, and I think the space needs to have more functionality can be put in that general area than is there now by adding a modular building.
Do you want to weigh in on this one?
I am too.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I walk my dog by there every day, so I'm familiar with the building, and I'm kind of like going along with what Joshua said, like just because the building was there, it doesn't mean you have to replace it right there. So, and I go along with Jeff, which is, we got bigger fish to fry, and so let's remodel the kitchen first before we work on the garage or whatever. And so, without really understanding the trends of the needs of what kind of activities go into this building, then what are you building without knowing that? And then I see two functions. I see an office function and I see a community activity function. And do they go together? How does that work? So for me, there's so many things before I would start spending a lot of money. I would like to know a lot more of how to do it right, so then it's done right for the future, not done right for how we perceive it right now. And for me, I think there seems to be one common denominator here, and that I think we all agree that the City Hall has got to go. Either it's got to be rebuilt or moved or whatever, and that's the one common denominator that we all have. And I kind of wish we spent more time on that and less time on these other things, even though I know they're important. But, we're still trying to get a bathroom built downtown and a little bathroom. And so when you start loading up the city with all these ideas of buildings, and then we're going to do this, we're going to do that, does the city have the staff to really oversee all that and to finance it? And it's a lot of things to do. So my vote is to just give it the minimal comfort cosmetics to make everybody feel comfortable and happy, and then table it for a bigger discussion, because in itself, it's a much more complicated project than what it appears to be, because there's a lot of functions that we don't see, that maybe kids are getting back into racquetball. We don't know that. So I'd like to know more about the trends of the youth, where they're going, what they're going to be doing, and what are the real needs of the Park and Rec offices. I don't know all those moving parts. So I'd say just do the minimal and move on, and then come back to it after the City Hall's been figured out.
Just as a point of clarity, is it possible to find out from Andre what they want in Parks and Rec, what kind of programming they put in that? Do they want their offices there, so we have a definitive answer to that? How much space they need for what programs, and how they would use a site in the park if it were to be developed down the line?
Andre, the Parks and Rec director, and I have talked about this both for the city of St. Helena and also other experiences that we've had, and we agree that the Parks and Rec function does not need to be inside City Hall, and that if there is a facility somewhere else, like in a park in this location, that it would be appropriate to co-locate offices and the space. So today we have a situation where the staff is running to different buildings for the programming, but if the programming was attached to their offices, it's a lot easier for us to manage that facility. And of course, in this context, we have access to the park as well, which we don't have with basically all the other programming spaces that they're using today. So I think what's been discussed is very representative of our vision as well.
Access to the park and fields.
Okay, so my idea is to actually offer up two different alternatives to City Council and let them decide. And I think part of the issue here is that I think we have a Park and Rec department that's changing and growing and improving. So I think if we stepped back a couple, 3 years ago, it might have been clearer as to what we needed. I don't want to go so far as to say City Council needs to master plan Park and Rec, but I think City Council needs to really delve into where's Park and Rec going, which is a little bit along, I think, what Oliver has said. So the one half of me says put the minimum in there so you can still, have the kids in the summer programs and whatnot, and really ask City Council to look at Park and Rec, delve into it, find out what they need, and at the same time they're finding out what they need and where the programs are all going, they also have to look at other facilities that we have in town that already exist. So potentially, once City Council looks into that and has a better understanding of where Park and Rec is going and, really what their needs are, you may find that the best thing to do is to lease out, the Catholic school gym. I mean, that may be what we want to do, and maybe their offices are in the classroom right next door. I respect Mark wanting to have everybody in City Hall, and so that makes sense. So maybe it's just, a temporary building or a temporary office when the programs are going on there. But so I guess I would offer up that we do the minimum, really ask City Council to take a hard look at Park and Rec and find out what they need, because there are other facilities too. I mean, there's 2 gyms at RLS, there's 2 gyms at the high school. Seems to me that we should be able to coordinate a little bit more and work with, or have, school district work with us a bit more. So we don't have to spend, whether it's $500,000 or $3 million, depending on if it's $600 a square foot or $150 a square foot, because we, the public, have paid for most of these other buildings I'm talking about, so we should be using them more efficiently, I think. So that would be the alternative, is really do the minimum, have City Council look at that much more deeply and figure out what we really need. But I would also throw out the alternative of this cafe food concession public-private partnership, because it may be a very viable idea, and the City Council might like it, and the public might like to have a little cafe concessionary stand out there. And so those are I would send the City Council 2 options.
Could we see what, most of the group liked number 2. And so you're saying you're going to send 2 options, which were not the consensus of the group.
We're actually not done talking yet. We're going to hear from the public after this, and then we're also going to have another discussion. So it may have, right now we don't know that most of the people want number 2. Many people spoke to number 2, but they may have changed their mind after we also hear from the public and after hearing from everybody. So I think we should hear from the public, and then we can have a further finalized discussion on this thing and try and refine it.
So, and please, in the interest of both time and making sure that you're really utilizing the time and space well, you're not finalizing recommendations, you're just moving to whittle them down much smaller right now. And if you respond to everything the public says, it's going to take forever. So can you just receive the information as opposed to going back and forth unless there's questions?
Is there an expectation on how many options for each property would be provided? Is it a big deal to provide 2 options for Head Start?
No, I don't think it's a big deal to have a couple options. I think it's a big deal if we have 5 options for 11 properties, because then the matrix gets a little wild, but yeah. So it's open for public comment if anybody wants to speak to the Head Start building. I know this is one of the buildings you guys really are excited and why you came here tonight. So, I love it. Thank God.
I'm Anthony McKelly. I've lived in St. Helena a long time. I was also a contractor, and I originally did the Carnegie Building when Lowell Smith here was mayor for the City Council to meet there. I really like Doug Barr and Mark's idea about letting somebody else do something with that building and see if it works. If it fails, it fails. I mean, if there's no interest, then go back to your other thing. I do know that the the Parks and Recreation people who are now in the Teen Center building, if I'm not mistaken, because I was up there the other day, are going to love to be somewhere else because they don't want to be near City Hall where all the people come in. I've already talked to people in Public Works who are in the other building there on Railroad. They're glad they're over there. They're going to want another building. But if you go by Railroad during the day, you see city staff walking up to the Teen Center building. That's not very efficient to have employees walk. I mean, it's great exercise and all that, but having them running back and forth, I mean, I don't know if the phones aren't working right or the internet or why they're doing that, but if you now put them down in the park, it's going to be a long ways to go for people to get answers, bring paper, and do all that. I'm a firm believer, because I was in the building business, of having everything in one building. So when you go to the new City Hall, hopefully, which will be built where it's at, I mean, you've got everybody spread out now. You've got Parks and Rec up here temporarily. You got Public Works over here. You don't have to move too many people out of City Hall, and hopefully people will go for a bond. But anyway, I know we're talking about the Head Start, but I don't think, and I went through the tour of all the buildings, too, to let you know. Pat, you're off about $100 a square foot for a modular building. I'll tell you already, you ought to figure about $250 to $300. Okay. That nobody knows what I think they want yet, and I think we still need to take some time to make a lot of these decisions. But Head Start, I think, could go into another building. I mean, I don't understand why the Carnegie building is in the shape it is, because when we left it, it was perfect. I mean, I don't understand what's happened with the elevator and all the other problems there, but it can house a lot of programs. And I really hate to see the city ever get rid of assets, but to lease it to somebody who's going to put in the money, why not try that? If it fails, go back and build your 3,000-foot building or whatever. But moving Parks and Rec there, I think, is a bad idea, is a really bad idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Gene, I guess you're back on, and we're going to try and see where we're at. I don't know if anybody has more to add, or if we want to sort of... Oh, Doug's running out of here right when he has a chance. If anybody's changed their mind, or if we've got more of a synthesis on where we're going, I don't know. Anybody want to have comment?
Yeah, I'd like to comment that Anna took the trouble to go over and talk to them, and they like the idea of moving to Crane Park. And I don't think that we should, not pay attention to that. She took the trouble to go and talk to them. And it doesn't have to be built right now, but I think we need to give the city council an option for something to make a better Parks and Recreation Department. And it is desirable to have their offices near where the activities are going on, because that activity requires some supervision. And so if their offices are in that building, like right now, if something's going on back in the teen center, they're in the front house, they have to go back there and supervise it, take care of the program. So that's why I think it's a good idea to have it all in one area. And I like the idea of having it in Crane Park, because they can do their administrative functions and do the supervision that's required at the same time.
Can I?
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and I agree with Pat, and I think it's a perfect place for those kids to be, and I just think Park and Rec would love it there.
Yeah, I want to be careful. I think we're getting into a little bit of a policy decision there as far as where the Park and Rec people actually are. And I think that's something that Mark is probably going to decide with Andre. So I think we're more talking about the building in and of itself. So if I'm hearing Pat and Suzanne, you're both saying you want to rebuild the building for Park and Rec programs.
Yes.
Well, also Head Start, too, to be there. Right.
There's no Head Start program.
Well, they're there every summer.
Well, there's a summer camp.
Well, that's a summer camp.
Right.
Yeah, but that's
right.
yeah.
The summer camp is
that's run by Park and Rec.
Part of that area would be able for them to use.
Yeah.
Right.
No,
okay.
that's what's there.
Yeah, and I don't want to speak for Park and Rec. I'm just saying they were open and excited about the idea of they like the idea of being connected to the park. They could see that. They could see they need a bigger room. So said they're fine where they are. They liked some of those ideas. I don't know the answer to that. I just think we have to talk to them more. And I like the idea. I know for the camp, a huge asset is to be at the park. The kids need to get outside. They use that. They use that more in the inside space, I think.
So you've got 4 options listed on this, plus the additional one that you all have kind of organically come up with, which is do the very minimum to make the building usable, and then wait for Parks and Rec to do more, give you more information about what they need and what they want. Is that accurate?
It was really have City Council figure out what Park and Rec's needs are, and then City Council would be in a position to direct whether you build a new building or do something else. So yes, it was do the minimum. It was sort of having City Council, though, not Park and Rec decide what they want to do, but have City Council dig into it and find out. I mean, obviously they would talk to staff, but I mean, City Councils would eventually make the direction as to what they'd want to do with it.
I think part of this is thinking long-term, which means kind of an overall master plan. I think that what happens in the short term is an obvious caveat that might not necessarily have to be another option per se, but is that a safe call? Yeah. City Council makes a decision.
I'd certainly like to see option 2 included. There are several of us who agreed that we like that option.
So what I'm suggesting is we just go through each one of the options and decide, and I would assume that maybe if more than 50% of you vote for it, it stays in your list. Would that be a workable way to move forward?
That's fine.
Sure.
Or can we just agree to do your idea of presenting both options
Yeah.
to the council? I heard the council members say that they wanted, and we met with them, that they want ideas. They're looking for that.
Yeah.
So let's
I
just give them
think so,
both.
too. Especially since some of them are speculative. We don't know if it's going to work or not. We don't know what Parks and Rec want, and we don't know whether the Catholic school's available. So without the
Or
information,
if
we
a
can't
cafe wants to
decide,
be
but-
there or not.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly. So
Yeah.
we should give a couple of options at this point. Maybe we can clarify some of this before we finish our work.
Cafe/food truck, maybe, investigate.
So that's number 1.
Okay.
What's
How many
number
of you, so all you're doing is voting for which ones move forward. You can vote for more than one. I'm not saying, it's just which ones of these are going to move forward. Can we whittle them down at all? We may not be able to. But number 1 going forward, which is the cafe food concession public-private partnership. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Those of you that want to go up. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Just for clarity, that would be that option alone in isolation without consideration for Parks and Rec as a vote for one in context.
No, we can have
You can vote for
we can have 4 options if we want to
I
send to
realize
city council.
we can have multiple
Right.
options.
Yeah,
but
we're
one is also encapsulated in 3, correct?
Well, yeah, except that
Oh.
they're really different concepts. I'm not sure you could get anybody to make it viable if you're mixing this mixed uses. One is really about it's free to the city to fix the building up and it'll generate income. That's one. If you now mix it with a brand new building that's going to be in there later and there'll be a space in that building, it's a different set of numbers that you're going to be looking at when you're trying to get this information. So it's more of a standalone idea. It seems to me that we should just look at 1 is a separate idea that's completely different, 2 is a separate idea that's completely different, and 3 and 4 basically are combinations. Why don't we just go with 1, 2,
and you can vote 4 times if you want to.
yeah, exactly. Because we're still going to
Sorry,
whittle this
didn't
down
mean to
one
set
more
us off
time
track.
anyway.
No,
Right?
you can. I mean, that's how you end up with more than one option going to city council.
Yeah.
So is anybody changing their vote? There were 4 to move forward on this, which is not half of you.
If it can happen, sure.
Yeah, I'm going to vote for 2 as well.
1.
Let's do
One.
it again. Let's do it again. 1.
So that's 6. That's more than half of you, right?
Okay.
Moves forward. Number 2. 8. That definitely moves forward. Number 3.
Okay, that's the small rehab number?
That's the mixed use, both food and parks and recreation functions.
Oh.
Are you
Sorry.
adding not a mixed use, but just fix it up and hold it number, so we're not just stuck with what's.
Yeah, we'll be adding that one.
I want
Yeah.
that one too.
So this number 3 is the mixed use, food and parks and rec. 4 is not enough, so that one drops. 4 is remodel and add to building for parks and rec.
Sounds like
That's like 2, isn't it? Could we combine 4 and 2?
that's fine.
That's me.
Is that different?
No.
The only thing about 4 that I wanted to add the 2 is the modular construction that got stuck into 4.
I think that's down in the weeds. We're gonna leave it to city council to decide if we want to build it. They're going to find out how they can build it and how they're going to finance it. We're not going to tell them that it's going to be 2 stories or 1 story or module construction or cinder block or frame construction. I mean, they're going to decide that. So it's whether or not we want to rebuild it or not. Pat, if I can, sorry, I was a little short there, but we get into this problem where we get into the weeds and we start designing the buildings, and I don't want to
We've
design
been in the weeds a lot.
I know, and I don't want to design the buildings. So can we?
Can we leave 4 into 2 and just leave it at 2?
2 works for me.
So 4 drops. And now the 5th one was doing the minimum this year to just make the building usable a little bit better, and then work into some sort of a master plan for Parks and Rec. And the city council decides what to do. How many of you want that one? All right,
Well,
that's unanimous.
I think it's the same as number 2, because I don't think you'd do number 2 tomorrow either.
Right.
I think you would want to step back and figure out what you want in there. So they seem like the exact same thing to me.
Well, it would be great if it could be that. I didn't, but some people were saying they wanted to build a new building versus step back. But if those that voted for number 2 want to say, yeah, step back, do a minimum, and then look towards, potentially building a new building if that's what Park and Rec needs and City Council wants to do, that'd be great if we can combine it and have the 2 options going forward.
That seems logical, doesn't it? That
Could we combine-
Number 2 is do the minimum work while we decide what Parks and Rec needs and while we even look at the number 1 stuff and see if it's even viable. That may disappear.
Yeah. The aspiration is
Get
a
there.
new Parks and Rec building, but it could fall apart
Right.
with more.
And so could number 1 fall apart. So let's give them the options.
Could we combine 2 and 4?
We did.
We did.
We did.
Missed that.
Number 5, we do no matter what, is what we're saying.
Yes, that's the top,
Yes.
right?
Right.
At this
From a-
juncture.
Yeah. Do we
Right.
need to vote on that?
You already did. You voted unanimously.
I think all those people came only for Head Start, and now we're done.
Can we move to Scout Hall? Can we do Scout Hall next?
Yes?
No, let's do Lyman Park. We can probably do Lyman Park, I bet. We can probably pull that one off in less than an hour.
God, I hope so.
Okay, Lyman Park.
I have an opinion.
Really?
Yeah, number 2, fix the fix the restrooms, put some signage on it, do what EMG says, and I think Mark disclosed today that maybe next year they're going to have a landscape architect looked at it, and so that's what I would say is the proposal to City Council.
Then how about 1 and 2?
It was 2. It was number 2. That was my number 2 with a little bit of expansion.
Well, if the city's already planning, if city manager could let us know, if they're planning to hire a professional landscape person, then we don't need to vote on that one.
Well, are you talking about a landscape or maintenance person, or are you talking about a landscape architect?
No, I'm talking about somebody to come in and design landscapes that would be a little more attractive than what's there right now.
Oh, okay. So we want to just fix it and hold it until City Council wants to do something more?
Would you like some clarification on that?
Sure.
So when the city council put together goals in the fall, one of the goals was to polish Lyman Park, but they wanted to postpone the decision-making on that until the committee had a chance to talk about Lyman Park and potentially make some recommendations. But clearly the bathrooms need attention, replacement, for example, and the staff is going to include in the budget proposal for next year funding for a landscape architect that would, we imagine, be of assistance to considering options for the park in terms of enhancements, probably several community engagement opportunities, and then a budget for those improvements. And I think what I've also heard from the committee is that the park, we would want the park to integrate with any building next to it, and the building next to it to integrate with the park. And so I think that's also feedback that we would share with a consultant that's brought on board later.
I think conceptually, all the concepts for what's going to go in that place have to do with Lyman Park being integrated into the whatever building ends up there. And so it would be premature to landscape that and then build a building there that has to re-landscape the whole thing. The idea is that it should be one piece, Lyman Park / City Hall, Lyman Park / Cultural Center, Lyman Park / whatever ends up there. Unless it's sold off as a hotel or something completely different, and then we could dress up the park, I suppose.
Maybe the landscape professional could consider their design in 2 phases. One would be immediate quick fixes that are essential now, as in number 2, and then also be aware that they're going to need to keep in mind future integration with the adjacent building.
It might end up being temporary as well, because realistically, those restrooms are going to be built into either City Hall or Cultural Center, so that you don't want to build it twice again. So
Yeah,
I think number 3 is viable. See what the other ideas are for that site and see how the park fits into it.
Yeah, you could almost combine, I guess what I'm saying, combine all 3 into one.
Yeah.
I go for number 2.
Here.
Number 2.
I'm saying combine the 3 into 1. It's all the
Yeah.
same thing.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
so,
I
too.
think that's what it is. You're sort of,
I'm voting for that.
Me too.
yeah, but we still need to get public comment.
Oh, wait a minute.
I don't know if there's anybody else that wants to make a comment about Lyman Park before we go to public comment.
Yeah, anybody else on the committee that wants to weigh in?
I just wanted to say there's some plaques on City Hall which recognize fallen veterans, and I think it would be imperative that we take that and help make that some part of the centerpiece for our park for the people that gave their lives for our freedom. So I'd like to see that brought over so we don't lose it.
Anything else from you guys? So public comment?
Yep, public comment? Close public comment.
So you're saying you just want to combine all 3 of them and it moves forward?
It's one big 1, 2, 3, yeah.
I'm liking, you're on a roll now. Scout Hall? I don't know. You've got 5 options here. Who wants to start with their proposal, idea?
Well, I have a real easy one for me. I just said my option number 1 was not to sell it, but to just give it to the Scouts for $1. After listening to the Scoutmaster to say how they could get funding and fixing and everything, that they would take charge of it. It's great for me. I think it's Scout Hall. So that's where I am.
I think it's a great idea, too, and it saves $213,000 in repairs. So I like number 1.
There's another aspect to number 1, which is the fact that we have a liability issue there as well. So if we sell it to the Scouts for $1, we also remove the liability issue. And I know some people have, well, there are some things here that at one point it was talked about the police station. It's not remotely large enough to put a 3,000 square foot police station in. Plus, it's not very safety oriented to have police officers running down the stairs to an emergency. So I want to strongly suggest that number 1 is the alternative we send to City Council.
I think you have a problem with Scout Hall in that the Scouts may just say, we like the way it is now, and we seem to be obligated to do the fixes and to be liable. I don't know why the Scouts would agree to buy the building for $1.
Is that the contract we have with the Scouts? Is that the deed to that property? It was given as a gift to the Scouts, but to the city for the Scouts? What's our liability on that? What does the contract read? Do you have any idea, Mark?
Well, the city is responsible for the building today, and if I heard the Scoutmaster correctly at the prior meeting, he indicated a willingness to consider acquisition, and I had an opportunity to speak with him last night for an hour, and we talked about a number of items related to the building, including acquisition, and I think there would be an openness to exploring that. So the recommendation could be to explore the idea as opposed to simply assuming that it happens. But that would be a clarification potentially on number 1 here that might be appropriate.
You know, the concern that I have is that if we are responsible and we touch that building, we may become responsible for bringing it, ADA compliance and a whole bunch of other stuff. I mean, it could really be a big ticket to try to make that building, truly compliant and functional. So I absolutely am in favor of offering it to them for 10 cents, if that's what it takes.
Maybe something to consider, Glenn, is that if we do have this huge amount of exposure because of the building, maybe there's some type of match or contribution we could help the Scouts with to ensure that they make it safe. And if it costs the city $100,000 to help them make it what it needs to be, but precludes us from being exposed to a bigger liability, then that might be a good use of funds, and it helps our community. So maybe, and plus, if it's our responsibility right now, giving a 16-year-old a car with no brakes isn't very responsible on our part. We should make sure that it's, worthy of travel. And I think this building, if it needs all that work, to go to a group that has a limited number of young men and a few guys or gals that are leaders, and say, hey, go raise a couple $100,000 and fix this thing, that might be a month of Sundays before anything happens. So it might be prudent for us to consider that.
It's my understanding that if we give it to the Scout Troop of St. Helena, it belongs to the Boy Scouts of America. They're under that umbrella. And it's my understanding that the Boy Scouts of America, your fellow out there shaking his head no, but I know the Boy Scouts of America are not poor by any means.
I'm not suggesting they're poor. What I'm suggesting is that if the process was, we'll sell it to you for $1 and you do the fixes and they have to go raise the money, that may not come to light. So we may be better served by helping them get to that end of that finish line in short order for a relatively nominal amount of money.
So if you go back to what Mark said, which was a refinement of number one, was to explore the idea of giving it to them or selling it to them for $1, and in so exploring, City Council could then come up with a best way to transfer it, which would maybe satisfy what you're suggesting, Jeff.
Explore it and get a legal opinion.
Yep.
There's an awful lot to this.
I think when you explore it, I think you have to ask them about their business model. Can they afford to maintain a building? It's one thing to give it to them. Here's an old boat. Good luck. And maybe they only have the cash flow just to sustain operations, let alone take on an old building. Because, as Glenn suggested, they might say, we just like the way it is, where you take care of it. We have our meetings. So it's one thing to take on a building. It's another thing to have to maintain it. Eventually, they'll have to deal with that foundation. And I know you can have fundraisers, but you can't have fundraisers in perpetuity, always trying to maintain a building. I don't know if the Boy Scouts is shrinking in membership. I don't know what the future is of Boy Scouts, and is it going to be a smaller group every year, and then it's going to be more stress on them to take care of this building. And I think part of the exploration would be that we could offer them alternative space in perpetuity somewhere, some guarantee. So what it is, we don't want a hostile takeover. We want to give them assurances that there is always a place somewhere in the city properties. And that should be part of the discussion, along with the legal opinion.
Well, not to be cold-hearted, but is it typically a city's task to provide public space for scouts?
Probably not.
Most scouts meet in schools.
Schools and churches.
And churches.
Yeah, so I mean, if they would agree to take it, again, not to be cold, but it's then their responsibility to maintain it like every other scout troop in America that owns a space somewhere, and it seems like they all manage to somehow figure out how to keep their entity going. So if we could sell it to them for a minimal amount of money, I think that's the way to go.
I'm not sure if everybody, and Mark, you can correct me, but the building actually isn't as old as it looks. The facade front is what's old. The building was rebuilt in 1979 or 80 or...
The Scoutmaster last night said 1983.
Yeah.
They left the front facade, so that is original, needs attention now, and the back of the building was rebuilt entirely.
That's what I also heard from the adult committee there. I've been in scouting a long time, and it sounds like they invested a lot of time and materials and funds to do a major rebuild on most of the building. And of course, there's heritage tied to that particular space. Initially, I thought that something like number 3 might be an option if there were a nice, viable space that they could relocate to so that parcel could be used for something else. initially thinking maybe a police station, but evidently it's too small. So I'm gravitating back toward number one, if that might work, and let the scouts stay where they are. I mean, not let work with them along that line.
I'm with you on number one. It's not ADA compliant. The Girl Scouts are using the upstairs now, so
Right.
we're at risk now, it seems to me.
I'm for 1 with 4, the legal opinion, those together.
Public comment.
I just want to make sure everybody on the committee has weighed in. Yeah?
Okay. Open for public comment.
I just have a question, and I don't think it's come up. Has anybody asked the Boy Scouts if they would give the building back to the city and get rid of the liability of repairing it? And if they gave it back to the city, then maybe the city could make another arrangement for a place for them to meet.
My name is Lowell Smith. The city was given the building specifically and the property with the limitations as to what it could be used for, and it's pretty definitive for scouts. One of the big challenges was for a long time was interpreted to mean Boy Scouts only. The big debate was, should we put in the Girl Scouts upstairs, and that was an interesting discussion, went on for a number of years. It is one of the interesting things that in the Scouts in this town, I think, are an institution that has broad-based support. Our Kiwanis Clubs has paid the light and electrical bill for that building for 47 years, I think. Rotary sponsors the particularly Scout troop itself. And from my knowledge of some of the people that are active in Scouting, primarily Bob Darter for many years and his widow Jan Darter, our Kiwanis Club is saying, do you need any more money? Can we make any more grants to you? And they said, no, we're in very good shape, and we have a wonderful opportunity, it seems like, to raise money because it's such a well-established institution in this town.
Thank you.
Hi there. Peter Scott. I just want to comment on the Scouts. I don't know too much about the legality of that building and how it's tied to the city and what the city's liabilities are. I will say, I know John Dodge was here, last week, the Scoutmaster, and our son went through Scouting here, and it is a very vibrant Scout troop that we have here. Scouting's kind of a dated, activity for young boys and girls, and our particular troop is incredibly active, and it's one of the best, in California for sure, and one of the best in the country. It's something we should really be proud of. And some of the things you hear on a national basis about Scouting excluding certain people or whatever, that doesn't apply here. A lot of Scout troops, or all Scout troops, as my understanding, are chartered by an organization, generally a civic organization or a church or school. Ours is chartered by the Rotarians and has been for a number of years. And I don't know, there's some really, really good activities where they're outside. They're not sitting in a church basement, beating each other up and playing games. They're actually out on hikes, getting merit badges, and turning into fine young men. It really is a good program. As far as the liability for the property, Pat, you had mentioned that if the Scouts purchase it, that your understanding that Boy Scouts of America would own it. I don't believe that to be the case. They could probably get grant money through the Boy Scouts of America and other organizations to do the purchase, but it would be owned by the troop locally. So I would suggest that there's some legacy there, and if we can honor it, keeping them there and lose the liability, I think it'd be a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Anthony McKell again. My kids both went through Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts. My son a little less than my daughter. But I think you will find that there will be a lot of donations coming to the Scouts once they're off the city's I don't want to say that word, but off the city's list. I mean, people will come and help them, like myself. I mean, we will go there and donate our time to fix the stuff. And I think if the city works their lease agreement or whatever, that you can just say, the Scouts accept all liability of the building. Very simple. It's their responsibility. But I think you will find enough donations to fix up the building to what everybody wants to do. Thank you.
The city's open for grants as well. You can apply for a grant from the city every year if you want to, and if you can get it, you can get it. So,
Any more public comment? Okay, close the public comment on Scout Hall.
So you're saying one stays, right? Is that, I think that was pretty much unanimous?
It's one with a little bit of three.
Yeah. Okay.
Well,
Does that mean 2 drops
four.
off?
one with 4.
One and 4.
Oh, with a little bit of 4,
4,
sorry.
yeah, 4, the legal opinion.
Yeah, one combined with 4.
And the word explore.
Explore. Okay. So the selling, number 2 goes off, number 3 goes off, and number 5 goes off, correct?
Correct.
Very exciting.
We got to vote,
Yes,
though,
let's
right?
go to another easy one.
Is everybody for that?
Yeah.
Is everybody for that?
Everybody's for that.
Groovy.
Everybody was nodding, so. Public Works Courtyard, we're skipping Carnegie because that's not on the short list, okay, at this point.
Public Works.
Who wants to start us off on the Public Works Courtyard?
I will, because I don't have too much. My option is number 2, which leave Public Works where it is for now, and do emergency repairs, a major cleanup, and repair or get new modular for office space. I think this is something that we need to just kind of fix a little bit for now, because there's other things that are really important that have to get done first, and put it out there for what to do next, because we talked about moving it to other areas, but for now, I think if it were cleaned up and do the emergency repairs, et cetera, and fix the office spaces for the workers so that they have a better place, and then take it a little bit later on down the road. That's my feeling.
I'll jump in. Number one, with a little additional to that, it seems to me that the wastewater site is probably a better site, but we still don't have definitive information about when the last flood was and all of that. Nonetheless, it's an already paved area. It seems to me to be a little bit bigger even than where they are now. We know they're in essence in a flood space now, and the other reason to possibly move them over to the wastewater frees up that piece of property where they are now. That piece of property being somewhat potentially a flood area doesn't make it incredibly valuable, but it's valuable for certain uses. I've seen that Harold Smith has a parcel that's west of Harold Smith that's now has a bunch of rusty old trucks in there that have been there for years and years and years. And the AJ Supply that used to be the garden center over there, I've heard rumors that they may be moving as well. In any case, I would think the city might want to explore the possibility of a land swap so that for somebody could put their rusty trucks down there and be to the benefit of the city if they would do that, and then take that other property and use that for workforce housing, potential of workforce housing up in there, which is already in essence in the west side neighborhood and be a really great place for workforce housing.
Where are you advocating workforce housing?
Do you know where the
What
AJ
is?
Supply, and then besides that, Harold Smith has a parcel. It's sort of a big piece up there that they just have
Thank
some
you.
old trucks and
I
stuff on.
understand.
You know what I mean?
So you're combining 1 and 6?
No, 6. Well, yes, in a sense, yes. I guess that could be. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Just for exploration, I think the city should explore that.
Yeah, I think for me, this one's a little bit like Park and Rec.
Exactly.
We don't have enough information.
Right.
We don't know enough about, the wastewater area. We don't know enough about the road. I think this is one of those ones where, where we, number 2 is what has to happen now, and I think there is some money in the budgets. They're already planning on pulling out, switching out some of the modulars there and putting in and fixing it up. So I think it's like do the emergency repairs now. Also, I guess what they used to do has changed. I mean, they've got like an auto shop or something there, but they don't do that anymore. I mean, so the whole thing really needs to be looked at, and the alternatives have to be looked at. We're sort of half punting it to the city council, but I think there's a lot we just don't know. We don't have enough information to really make much more of a definitive, suggestion other than fix the thing now and make it, livable for these people. But with, a strong message that the city needs to, take it on and figure it out.
I really agree with that, except, Mark, your idea that you had a couple of weeks ago is really worth pursuing, and I'd really like to see the city work with Harold Smith's company, assisting them in filling out the permits that have to be filled out to dredge the creek. Because I really think if that creek is dredged, I don't know about the 3-foot wall.
No, I think that's all part of what would happen. I mean, that's what the city would have to.
I think you're right,
It may take 2 years to get the permits.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
But if the city's working with Harold Smith may be more interested in doing a land swapping, helping it out. This deserves exploration, I think, for several different reasons.
But the property's more valuable if it can be
dried out.
I'm not sure that would take it out of the
Exactly.
floodplain, but it would make it a lot less likely to flood. So it's a more valuable property.
Right.
And he, from what Mr. Belt, who reported to us, said that Mr. Smith just doesn't want to fill out all those forms. It is kind of daunting. And I know we have people at the city level who've filled out reports like that many times, and they probably could help.
Yeah.
It almost seems like we can combine all 6 of these into one, but as a sequence. We would do number 2 first, emergency repairs, while we're considering whether the wastewater site is feasible and it could be moved there. If it could, then we would look at number 6 in addition to that. Are there affordable housing locations either there or as a swap?
Right.
And if that doesn't work, then we need a more permanent solution there, which may involve dredging, may involve a wall, and the dredging and the wall might be associated with housing if it gets put on the site. So this is all part of one big
One thing I would not support
spaghetti.
is putting housing on that site.
Why not? Why not?
No, it's, you can't just keep putting affordable housing in the worst places in town. And that's not an attractive site. There's no other housing
Well, it's
around.
not now.
I could certainly support if the city could do a trade with A&J, putting housing on that site, but certainly not the site where the corporation yard is now.
I'd like to endorse 2 only. I think that there are too many speculations in that trying to go any further than just say, make the repairs and let the staff and city council figure out what the longer term solutions are here.
That's number 5.
All right.
5 is have administration look at and fix and move as needed. Current budget work involves new buildings.
Then put
That's
2
number
then
5.
put 2 and 5 together. They're one thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
But it can't hurt to make suggestions about what they could do, as opposed to just saying, figure it out. And
No,
some of those things would be the workforce.
I think when we write it up, we would, make some strong, comments about them needing to
options.
take a hard look at it sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
And, for a permanent solution.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So let me see if the recommendation would be, in general, 5, have them determine, with number 2 being your top priority, and then possibilities to consider are all the other ones, right? Dredging.
Right, I agree with that
moving.
before we've heard, public comment.
Okay. I just want to get a sense. You ready for public comment?
Just one additional comment that might be helpful. If you, on the agenda for next Tuesday's council meeting, we've included repairs to the facilities as well as replacement of a couple of the facilities. So the double-wide trailers, after January, we had a lot of rain in the buildings. After your tour, we had additional rain events that really led to a lot of water inside the double-wide trailer. So, in fact, one of the ceiling tiles fell and hit a staff member in the head thankfully that person wasn't injured. But we decided to go ahead and move forward on exploring ways to either repair or replace these buildings, and talk to a number of modular companies about that, and determine that we could repair the double-wide trailer. That was the most cost-effective option. So we are moving forward with that, and a recommendation is on Tuesday's agenda. That report's been published. And the most cost-effective solution for the single-wide trailers, the lockers in the bathroom, was to replace those trailers. They had reached the end of their useful life, and we have proposed a lease for 3 years, which gives us flexibility to either move forward with another idea down the road, or we still retain the option to purchase those single-wide trailers. And so if you have any additional comments on that, that will be on Tuesday's agenda. And I think it still gives us the flexibility to look at other items. We've also had a conversation with Harold Smith ownership, and we have a mutual interest in exploring securing permits for dredging as soon as possible. So we're actively attempting to work with 3 different regulatory agencies, as was mentioned at the last meeting, in order to try to hit the timeline for this summer. And if we miss it, we would have to wait till the next year.
Had you talked to them at all about that land swap concept? So that essentially in the middle of this negotiation that's mutually beneficial, it might be a good time to say that would be mutually beneficial too.
Not necessarily directly with them, but it's something that we've thought of. In terms of housing, for example, we've also thought if you elevate, typically as long as you build 1 foot above the base flood elevation, you're able to build. So if you put vehicles down below and you build 1 story up, or floor 2 and floor 3, you would have a vineyard view looking south, and also, I guess, primarily south. But that does seem to me that it's a potential housing site of some sorts if we were comfortable having vehicles down below. So haven't had conversations about a wall, but in terms of the dredging, that's something that's going to have to recur on a regular basis. So that's not a one-time dredge. That will have to be something that we do on a continuous basis moving forward.
You're going to have to get officially a FEMA certification that it's out of the floodplain before you put any housing there.
Any other committee members? Public comment? Open for public comment?
Anthony McKelly again. Those buildings down there, Public Works has to hire somebody who knows something about maintenance. When I went on the tour, I asked them about the hole in the roof. It leaks there. Well, now there's a hole in the floor. I mean, nobody fixes anything. They have to get somebody on their staff, because a lot of this is minor repairs, like some of the sills on buildings that are rotted, that staff could fix this stuff. And if they would do that. But you need to clean up that site just because it's an eyesore. 90% of those vehicles in there don't run. All that equipment is just sitting there. I don't know why the city doesn't give it away to somebody for scrap, for free, just to clean it up. Then they would have almost 3 times as much room there to park more stuff. But and as far as a housing place, Harold Smith and Son goes by every day, every minute of the day. Housing is not going to be a good spot. I'm sorry, but nobody's going to want to live next to a dusty road with a lot of trucks going back and forth. But it just needs to be cleaned up right now, and then going down to the wastewater treatment plant is a great idea. Or you take all the dirt that's going to come out of the York Creek Dam and bring it down there and fill that site up so it's out of the flood zone. Another possibility down the road. Thank you.
It's a good time.
Peter Scott again. I just want to comment on that area. I live in that area. I live over by AJ in my backyard. On the other side of my fence is Harold Smith and that piece of property you're referring to, Doug, on the north side of Sulphur Creek.
Yeah.
They just purchased that within the last few years from the original owners of Harold Smith. They didn't own it. They leased that land and stored their salvage and broken material and just old trucks and stuff there. That is on a 100-year floodplain, and I'm not sure if that can be built on as far as the land swap thing. I'm not sure if you can build on there or not for housing. And they're also under fairly well, they haven't been monitored on this or enforced, but they are have a non-conforming use because they've been there so long. But there are restrictions on the expansion of their business and what they can and can't do at their present location. They no longer mine the creek, of course. That's been 20 years since they stopped doing that, and that's the reason they're in the location they are now. But as far as swapping that land and putting something else on there, I don't know if you can do that because of the flood risk there, with or without the dredging.
Right.
So just throwing that out. And A&J has grown to the point where, yeah, they do need to move. They said they would have 2 or 3 trucks in there a week. They have probably 15 tractor trailers coming down by the school, by the park, trying to get in that. Well, Jeff lives over there. He knows. And so that might be a better solution for some sort of housing there. That might be a much better solution.
I heard the other day at Steve's a rumor that they'd already taken a site in Calistoga. I don't know if that's true or not.
Yeah, I heard the same thing. So hopefully that, a better use on that property.
Right.
It's really tough for them getting tractor trailers in and out of a place that was never intended.
Right. So that may free up too.
Those. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any more public comments? Okay, public comments closed.
So, the option that I heard, and I just want to check to see if there's really any others that you want, is to have number 5 be your umbrella. Underneath that is number 2 with your top priority to fix it, which is already in place. And then the options that you want them to consider as they figure out what to do are the number 1, 3, 4, and 6. So it kind of puts it all together.
I would really like to take 6 out of there.
Want to take a vote on that? Who wants to take 6 out?
I would amend 6 to say consider a land swap of the courtyard for workforce housing.
I would
Work for you,
suggest we
Pat?
leave it vague and just have them
Figure it out
explore it, and we can strongly encourage them to look at options and not drag it out for the next 5 years, but look at other locations or other ways of improving the property and the condition and what's used there. Because we may also find, what Anthony was talking about, there's a lot of stuff on that property they don't even need. I mean, they may be able to move to a site that's even smaller. So there's a whole lot to look at. Again, it's one of these things where we don't know enough to make any specific recommendations, I don't think, other than fix it and get things livable and,
Yeah, I'd leave consideration of housing in there. We have so few sites, and that one is
Well, that's
great location. It may not work out. I mean, your points are
If we
all
leave that
valid.
in, I will get up in a city council meeting and object to that being left in.
Okay. I've never heard you object to housing
That's
before.
right. And I'm a little disappointed that I'm the only housing advocate sitting here.
Let's just take a-
But I think that pigeonhole. Well, never mind. Sorry.
I'm a housing advocate.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think you're being a bit obtuse about that. And architecturally, there's many things you can do to mitigate a dusty road, and a vineyard view is pretty valuable.
Yeah, but it's not.
But I wouldn't take it off.
We can get into the whole housing discussion.
No,
We can talk
let's
about
not.
economy of scale. That's not a big enough property to build, to get proper financing, to do what you would need to do to build acceptable housing on that site. And forget the vineyard view. We heard from somebody about the trucks going by. That's just not a good housing site.
But the city council can reject that idea, that aspect of the proposal. I mean, the proposal really is to fix it right now and make the emergency repairs
and I think
they
that's
need.
what we should stick with
and
and leave the
then
housing out of it.
Look at other options and
We
opportunities
just
that
wanna make sure it's
exist.
not in your backyard.
Can we take a vote on all of those that want to take the housing out? Raise your hands.
I do want to
4.
take the
So
housing
it
element
stays in for right now, but add possible land swap.
Would be useful to put that in.
Okay. Public Works Corporation Yard is done. Signorelli Barn. You want to start us, Oliver?
I wanted to go back to one of them. Is that legal?
Holding. It's not football season.
It's up to you guys.
What are we doing?
Oliver wants to go back to one.
Sure.
I haven't thought it through, but I was thinking that, okay, so we have these arguments that we don't want the liability, and we have the ADA, and we have the gender factor, blah, blah, blah. And those are all strong arguments. At the same time, we all respect the Scouts. It's a noble community group, and it's got a great history, and so we want to honor that. And so we're talking about, okay, here's this old boat, and it's your problem. Here's a buck, and goodbye. But we don't really know if they can sustain themselves. So the worst thing you can do is to let somebody go on an old boat, and then it sinks in front of your eyes. So we have to be a little bit kind of responsible as far as if we do let them go, that we know that they can make it. So then I was thinking, well, what's the other alternative? Because I was thinking about what Tim was saying, which is, you can't have favoritism by the city, having in perpetuity some space for them, because then everybody else would want a space in perpetuity. So I was thinking, well, what if you, even though you own the building, what if you paid the appraisal value of the building as an option to the Scouts? Because I think the land is valuable from a civic use, and I think the Scouts could probably be happy to go anywhere that was a nice place, and et cetera. Where that strategically is an important lot, whether you think you can put a police department there or not. I've been to police departments where you've gone upstairs, and sometimes you have the dispatch upstairs, and you have the guys that run out with the guns downstairs. So we don't know if that could work as a police station, so I don't want to just throw it out the window. Sorry, Mark. I'm looking at the possibilities, because I've seen little Bobby stations in England, that serve whole neighborhoods in Hampstead, and they're like a third of that size. So what if the Scouts, in other words, just part of their explorations to say, we'll buy you some other place for this property, so that they could have the option to go somewhere else that doesn't have this intense maintenance, that might be a better building for them. At least give them the option, and we hold ourselves open to more options, because if they said, hey, we found another place we'd rather go, we'll take your $800,000 or whatever the deal is, then that way the building's free to see what we can use in terms of, what if it was a great apartment complex for firemen? I don't know. But I don't want to limit our options, and I don't want to limit their options. Like, take it for a buck, or, we're not going to fix it, or whatever. So I don't know. I want to add to that exploration further negotiations to get a win-win situation, so they are not like just held out there to the wind to have to take care of something. Yeah, they could get a fundraiser. Everybody's coming out of the woods. Let's save the Scouts the first year. It's really hard to go back the second year, the third year, the fourth year, and then they're constantly stuck with having the cash flow of this building. And so I'm just trying to find a bigger thinking in terms of the Scout, just limiting it to just a couple of these options. That's all.
I would tend to agree with that. I'd like to explore with the Scouts some other options, even though the default is, or there's strong ties, of course, and heritage to that building. But if they did have another attractive option, for example, one thing I thought about is at Crane Park, if there were a new facility there that was nice and spacious and clean and modern, where they could bring in some of their Scout lore and displays and so on, and have a good space for meetings, maybe that could be a topic for further discussion. Even though, of course, there's a lot of investment, as I said, in labor and materials on the part of the Scout community, and heritage for Troop 1, which is amazing. Maybe that could be explored a little more. And as Oliver said, I thought that might be a good space for, maybe police, but here it's possibly too small, but it seems like a nice location conceptually for police to relocate, and that would free up some space on Main Street. But so I guess in a long-winded way, I'm endorsing what Oliver is suggesting, to see if we can explore some other options with the Scouts.
I was under the impression that we really had already made that sort of clear, that the city would enter into some discussions with the Scouts, and that options, I assumed, would probably be explored. And I don't know that we can figure out what the right negotiation is at this table, but I'm sure they'll have ideas. But I think your points are extremely well taken. Trying to raise money for ongoing maintenance is really tough. Buying something is a lot easier to do. So, but I think we'd be giving the administration and encouraging the administration to enter into some negotiation and see what they can come up with.
So I was under the impression that when you voted for number 1, it was exploring the idea of selling or giving it as well as transferring it. So I thought it was included in that.
That's what I thought as well.
Talking about the city buying the parcel from the Scouts.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
Which, to me, I guess that was one of the options under transferring it. But
I'd like to understand that a little bit better. Oliver, so you're basically saying we should give them $800,000 so we can spend $3 million to develop the property? I mean, that's in essence what you're saying, right?
Well, I think another flavor of that is number 3 on the Scout Hall, where...
Wait, I was trying to understand first the concept over here, because that's what it sounded like. I mean, we were actually going to pay money to then spend even more money. I just want to make sure I got that from a...
Well, what it is it's the lot. It's the lot. It's not a matter of you spending $3 million. It's the idea that it's... I think Lowell wants to say something. I think he wants to tell me that... I think what it is I think we're going to... This is a mutual situation. We're not taking something from the Scouts. If the Scouts are willing to go into negotiations and they'd rather go somewhere else than be saddled with this building, we just want that options that where the city would pay for the lot so they could find an alternative that would make more sense for the long-term viability of the organization.
But the city already owns the lot.
The city owns the lot, and there's deed restrictions on that.
I know. Wait. Time out. If you'll get a chance to come back up and do public comment, but you got to do it at the counter. Right now, we're having a discussion amongst the committee members here.
Yeah.
So the city does own the lot, though, Oliver. So basically, you're saying you want the city to just give a $800,000 contribution to the Scouts, which then leads to, well, why don't we give a $2 million contribution to the Historical Society, and why don't we give $1 million to the Randa House? I mean, we can't go. I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying.
No, not. Yeah, it's in consideration. It's not. I don't understand these other analogies, but it's just that it's a way to explore. Let's say that the Scouts say we don't want it for $1. We don't want it. And so we're in this impasse. So I'm trying to figure out how to get out of the impasse, because what if they say, well, it's just you're stuck with the building and you take care of it.
I think if we added number 3. We added number 3 to 1 and 4 that we've agreed to, and add the word negotiate with or discuss with Scouts to number 3, moving elsewhere as a trade for another site, and add that to the mix.
Yeah, just more options.
Can I see if I could add some clarity? Maybe not, but let me try. It sounds to me like what you're saying is the city ought to buy out the lease, in a sense, for $800,000 for the Scouts, and then we'd be free to use that building.
I'm not saying that we do that, but just to look at that option.
But the repair on that then becomes $250,000. I think that's what it is on the board. So we're in for about $1 million there just to get the Boy Scouts out of the building and then turn it into something else the city wants. Which doesn't make any sense. But I understand your point.
You wouldn't repair it.
But I understand your point, which is that you don't want the Scouts to be stuck. But I'm hearing from the public, from 1, 2, 3, Peter and Anthony and Lowell, that there's a lot of public support for the Scouts and that they think that they can keep that thing potentially alive. And all we're saying is we ought to have a negotiation. Let's find out what they say. Nobody's precluding anything. Let's see what the Scouts say.
Well, I know, but if they understand,
so I'm concerned about the time.
All the options, they might come up to
this? Can we vote on whether to add this piece to the Scouts' recommendations.
Put it on there.
I'd like to move that we add number 3 to the mix with the word negotiate or discuss as part of number 3, which says move Scouts elsewhere as trade with the current site. It's got the word trade in there, but I think it's just, discuss and negotiate with them as a possibility as part of the mix. We've got 1 and 4 combined. I think we could blend number 3 in there, too.
Absolutely.
So add it underneath the same umbrella.
It'd have to be a satisfactory alternative for the Scouts, for sure.
I am not going to vote in favor of this change
Me neither.
because I think it's already incorporated in what we've discussed. The exact terms of the negotiation are whatever they turn out to be, and the creativity should certainly be part of those discussions, but I don't think we can figure out exactly what the terms and conditions should be. Anyway, I support the idea, but I think it's already incorporated in what we've done, and I don't wish to go any further with the issue.
I don't see how that's incorporated in combining 1 and 4. To 3 says to negotiate or discuss with the Scouts the idea of going elsewhere as a trade for the current site, but that's not what we came up with.
What you added to number 1 was in terms of exploring the idea of giving to the Scouts or transferring the property in some way. That was the addition to that I heard. I assumed that was number 3.
We combined 1 and 4, I think.
I think it's pretty wide open, and basically we're telling the city to take a look at Scout Hall and try to figure something out. And that's in essence what we're saying. Whether you want to wordsmith it one way or the other, I mean, that is what we had previously voted on, was suggesting to City Council that they negotiate with the Scouts and see if there's a way to, I guess, either get the Scouts out or get us out, one or the other. I mean, however they do that, they do that. I don't know why we have to change it. I really don't understand why we have to change what we already voted on.
It's assumed by combining 1 and 4 that that's going to include talking with the Scouts about an attractive alternate location.
Just have a vote on whether we want to change
Yes.
the vote that has already been taken.
All those in favor of changing the vote that you've already taken, adding something or detracting something, raise your hands if you want to change it. 1.
As long as the
2.
negotiation is as Mark described, I don't want to change it because it's already in there.
That's what I'm trying to say, but I don't see it in there, but if it's, I guess we can assume it is.
Signorelli Barn, are you up for it?
Yeah.
I like the barn. I think it's great. I think we take it and make it into something viable for the community, like an event center tied into the parking at Miley Park. And then, if that can't be satisfied, I think we ought to consider option B of moving it over to the Adams Street project.
I'll jump in there. I think number 3 was fantastic. We were lucky to have Mr. Horowitz come and offer his community theater group. It's a perfect place for a community theater, and as a backup to that, the agricultural equipment of the Historical Society, potentially using that as a showplace if the theater doesn't work out. I think that's a perfect use for that. Because the last time I did a show in L.A., the average audience was 9, which is probably a lot to do with me being in the show. But nonetheless, audiences for community theater aren't huge, so parking doesn't become a liability to the neighborhoods. Yet it's a great use for that little site. It would be great if they can come through, and they seem to be gung-ho for it. And Suzanne made it seem like there's a viability for the Historical Society there as a backup, or if they get there first. So.
Yeah, I like the theater idea as well. They've already said they'll do the rehab. They can raise the money. It adds a cultural dimension to the city.
Right.
I mean, it's one more thing. It's in a part of town that doesn't have a whole lot of activity. Right. It's in a super cool site. I mean, I would love to go to theater in that barn. That would be so cool. So yeah. I wholeheartedly support that. It's basically we get it fixed for free, and we add a another great attraction into the city.
So we're talking about number 3?
Actually, can you clarify the difference between 1 and 3? It seems like A of 1 should be included in 3 because
Right.
fix is just making a stable thing that's not going to fall down.
I think
using it
1
for
and 3 are
storage,
kind
right?
of combined and similar. I think the difference was that with 1, the city was the one doing all the fixing.
Oh, my
and
understanding.
then
Sorry, my understanding is that 1 is fix, as in just make it so it's not going to fall down, and then use it for adjunct storage like it is now. And then 3 was a rehab of the building so it could have use beyond things inside and accommodate people.
Right, but the
Yeah.
rehab wasn't city produced. It was
Yeah,
produced
whoever
by
does the
community
rehab
groups
is outside of.
outside the city. It was
There's
just a public-private
nothing on here that
partnership
says
thing.
who's doing it, but.
So if that's correct, that number 1 is meant to be fix it so it doesn't fall down and put a wall so people don't drive
but,
into it.
but 1 also talked about having events there, so you had to have fixed
Oh.
it to a certain level.
Yeah, I think that's why it's confusing. I would
Yeah.
say
Yeah.
that in order to fix it to a certain level, it's a rehab to have people. So I would just put events and move it down into 3.
Yeah, I would agree
And why don't
with
you just
that.
say 3 and we put it out to somebody else to rehab it, and whoever the winner is that gets, whoever comes with the best negotiations to the city to rehab it is the one that ends up getting to lease it back from the city after they've rehabbed it.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to clarify between 1 and 3 because I don't think that 1 is clearly defined as.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I agree with
its
Joshua.
intent was.
I think we should just add the word events into number 3.
Add the word what?
Events that's listed in number 1. I think we should explicitly add the word events into number 3.
As the sole voice that wanted to turn it into planks, I really like if it can be made into something. It worries me that somebody will bring it up to a sufficient level that it won't fall down today, but it is in the process of falling down.
Yeah, shouldn't do that.
And so it really needs more than just, a quick fix. It has to be done right, and there's that question of preservation versus rehab. And if we're going to live with it, and I agree, when I drive down Pope Street, it's a lovely sight. It really is. But it has to be done right, or in effect, or not at all. Otherwise, it's just going to collapse in a pile of worthless lumber.
Under historic building code, the proper term is reconstruction.
Okay, let's change it to that. Can we
On
change?
number 3?
I would vote to change it to that word.
Can we change add that to number 3,
Yeah,
and then we can have one thing, which is
just take out rehabilitate and put reconstruct.
to the point of safety, at
Well,
least for the
the
moment.
man that came and talked to us is with one of the best construction companies in St. Helena. He's been around for a long time.
Yeah.
He really loves theater, and I know a couple people whose houses he's
Me
remodeled.
too.
He's done a fabulous
He worked
job.
on my house. He's fantastic.
Yeah, but I guess it would have to go out as an RFP if we do that, and so that more than one company got a chance to make
Well,
a bid
unless
on
it's
it.
part of
But
unless
I certainly think the contract could be written in such a way that they can't just begin to fix it and walk away. They have to reconstruct it.
Unless it's part of his theater deal.
Is there any need for us to spell out a period of time in which they would have to raise the money or to do anything like that? That is, it isn't an open-ended.
I don't know that we have to spell that out. Certainly the city, when they're signing a contract, starting to run through the permit process, would have to spell that out and give them certain limitations, yeah.
Do we want to specify that we continue to own the property? Somebody might want to reconstruct it, but they might want to take ownership of the property.
Typically, if someone were to lease that, they would have a TI budget, and they would need to bring it up to some type of code for their own use. So it would all be part and parcel of one negotiation, and I think that the city council will figure out which direction they want to go, whether they want to rehab it with the city's money and then lease it to somebody, or give somebody the opportunity to lease it at a lesser amount but take on the repairs themselves with some type of stipulated punch list to make sure that they can rebuild it in a way that's in keeping with historic preservation.
But I think I'm hearing your concern. What we would want to do is at least our proposal to the city would want to stipulate that we actually don't lose ownership of the property.
Yeah.
Right. You'd want to add that certainly in there to make sure that the city didn't.
If I recall correctly, the gentleman that came to us
Kevin.
Mr.
Kevin,
Horowitz,
yeah.
said that he would fix it if the city allowed his theater group to use it free of charge and to have like preferential treatment as far as scheduling. That's what I think I heard him say.
I don't remember the free of
That's what
charge.
I
didn't hear the free of
but
charge.
it
I
seems
heard
like
Probably
that they
needs
would
further
lease it back.
conversation, right?
that's the negotiation with the city, it seems
Yeah.
to me, that
You know, I had a conversation with him afterwards, and I said, what if, instead of your $850,000 going into compliance, legal compliance, and trying to get this building up to code, I mean, we're talking about public assembly, handicap parking, ADA, I mean, health, I mean, it just, egress, it just gets really heavy duty when you take on that kind of construction. And $850,000 is going to evaporate so fast. I said, what if you just saved your money and there was a alternative somewhere? There was a cultural center somewhere that already had a small little theater that you could just rent out for your needs, and you saved your money for operation and marketing. And you know what his answer was?
No.
No, I don't know what his answer was.
His answer was, I'd like to explore that. Any rational person who has the alternative of just moving it to a turnkey operation, just renting it, as opposed to taking on.
Well, he should explore.
Well, but what I'm trying to say is we're running ahead of ourselves. We think that we got somebody ready to take on that barn and redo it.
No, I think all we're doing is saying
Yeah.
that I totally agree with Joshua's reaction to that barn, his opinion. And I think what we're saying is that we'd like to see it reconstructed, exactly as it says here, and list with someone to lease or rent.
Then it's an RFP.
That's all.
It's an RFP, so it can't be singled out.
Of course not.
So that has to be tested. So, that's a question of how do you shape that RFP? What goes in there?
This is weeds. We don't want to get into the
well,
weeds.
I'm just
So, I mean, really, it's the concepts that you want to have moving forward. Others?
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Suzanne.
Well, I have to just say that my option is number one, and it was to be reconstruct and use as a historical barn with the artifacts and tools of the farm communities in this area. How that would be done by the Historical Society, I have no idea, but I would like to be able to include that in case this theater thing doesn't work out. He might maybe change his mind, but it's a historical barn and it needs to be reconstructed. How we are able to do that, I'm not sure, but that's all I have.
Suzanne, wait, I don't think we're specifically saying that the recommendation to the city would be to provide the contract for rehab and the lease to the upstage Napa Valley. We're not saying that. We were saying it's more, it's open to whoever wants to. So you'd throw RFP. So the Historical Society would be able to bid on that and say they want to do it, and that you want to turn it into a barn for your agricultural items. I mean, it would be open to anybody to do it.
Is the city indemnified from anything that happens there? If you're the landlord?
We carry insurance for all city properties.
Okay.
I had one thought also kind of backtracking a little bit along the line of Glenn's idea, which was if there were an alternative space for events and community gatherings and festivals, and et cetera, we could repurpose that lumber and perhaps use that lumber in another civic project like something on Adams Street or a cultural center, or for even interiors can be done with repurposed wood. I know I'm getting in the weeds there, but all I'm saying is we should explore taking that building down and renovate those two corners so that they're nicely landscaped as parks, maybe with matching protective fencing on the corners. There's a huge oak tree on the adjacent corner that's a beautiful parcel that's just now weeds. And to Joshua's point, I think the parking should be expanded regardless, and the park there that's adjacent to Signorelli Barn, I think that should we consider having that renovated or seriously cleaned up in conjunction with doing something with the barn, because I took a close look around all that property all the way to the back, and I think that park is in, how should I put this? It needs some
GLC.
severe maintenance, some serious maintenance attention and upgrading. Along with that, I would take a look at the parking situation as well. It could be easily expanded.
So I'm concerned
is
that we
is
get too much into the weeds, because I would assume...
one of these alternatives?
Right.
Well, I guess it was, I caveated that with a question, could we include more about the overall property that the barn sits on to be looked at? In conjunction with, we're going to spend money or do something with the barn, I think you need to upgrade the whole parcel, including the one on the
I know.
opposite
I'm
corner.
asking you, though, which one of these alternatives are you expanding off or working from, or are you suggesting to throw out a brand-new one that we didn't discuss a few weeks ago?
Yeah, I guess I'm taking a relook at number 2. I like the idea of number 3, reconstruction, but not sell the property, excuse me. The part of number 2 that says tear it down, take down the lumber, and repurpose the lumber for another city project, and then turn those 2 corners into really nice pocket parks for community use. Picnics, playgrounds, something like that.
We're getting close to the end. I just wonder if I could get a little clarity on whether we're suggesting that the city actually do some rehab to get it up to a lease standard for Kevin Horowitz or for the Historical Society, or are we suggesting that they put it in a position that it's not going to fall down further and build a wall so cars don't run into it until they have a chance to explore? What is it that we're suggesting here?
Well, we haven't suggested anything yet.
So I would say that in
around.
number 3, we should put that into the city, bring it up to only to a standard that it's safe and won't fall down and protect it.
That would be part of the RFP. That would have to be part of the RFP. The city's not going to go into a negotiation and have somebody rehab it without bringing it up to legal standards.
But if the negotiation with Kevin and then these guys takes 2 years, that barn's likely to be hit by another car because there's no wall. So the question becomes, are we suggesting to the city that they make sure that it's a safe environment that's not going to fall down? That's the maximum we go, and then after that, we see if they manage to get one of these 2 groups or another group in there.
It's the same as the Head Start building. We decide to do something bigger with it, make sure it's okay in the interim.
There you go.
Yeah.
I think that's what we should make sure we put in
Well,
there.
not knowing that I might actually have some more support on the lumber question.
Not if you want to live here a few more years.
It doesn't hurt to have a fallback position that says if you can't find somebody to stabilize or to, what was the term of art that was used, reconstruct. It doesn't hurt to have another option that says, preserve at least what is of value there, which is, because otherwise it's just going to fall down.
Well, there's $88,000 in the current year repairs, which I think stabilizes the thing. So, I mean, I think we can
That's
say...
already stipulated, then that's it, stick with that, and then explore the options for using it.
I have another idea. Would it be possible simply to say, have the city submit an RFP for a company to reconstruct for them to use for their purposes? That's not very good language, but the point I'm trying to make is that St. Helena Construction said they would fix it. That was what he stood up there and proposed to us.
I think
is
that's...
that they would fix it.
I think that's 3. That is what 3 is.
Yeah, but then I heard people say, but we can't put it out for lease until we spend the $88,000.
No.
Did I misunderstand?
No, I don't know. I think what we were saying was if it appears that this thing's going to take 2 or 3 years to get through the process, that we want to do something to keep it stabilized.
Anna, have you weighed in on this?
I agree with that. I'm getting tired. But yeah, I agree with that.
Can I jump in? Josh, can you move this barn?
Well, you can deconstruct it and move the parts. You're not going to move it in whole.
Because I was just thinking about number 4. Is there a way we can say move to Adams or some other place I mean, does it have to be Adams? I mean, what if we moved it further into that park so it had more ground around it and then it was safer? And then we designed it so it opened up to the whole grass field. So if you did have events and this thing started organically take off, then they could put like a tent on that grass field at night. I don't know. In other words, it's really constricted in that corner, and it's a little dangerous, and now and then a car hits it, you got people inside. So if there's a way to preserve the beauty of this barn, the heritage, and everything else, but we just simply moved it into a better location in the park so that it had a better use out of it, more space around it, more flow, I don't know, more grand approach to it. I don't know.
I think that's a great concept.
You know,
the current
I think you lose its entire
the current location's not
historic
suitable for ADA
value once you
parking.
move it.
It's too crowded.
I think. I mean, it's been there for as long as it's been there, and the minute you move it, it's like.
The whole point is that it's there now.
Yeah.
You know, you walk your dog past the Head Start building, but I drive by this building at least 4 times every day. Kids play soccer there constantly. I think that would be a really bad thing to take away from the young people, that opportunity to have a place to play soccer and put this barn in the middle of the...
We're not putting the barn in the grass. We're going back into the trees.
Well, and you're going to have to cut down trees and get rid of the community garden and...
It's a river, the creek, or...
Why don't we just...
Why don't we wait? If everybody's had their say, or if Jeff, you want to say what you say, and then we can open this thing up to public comment, and then we.
I was going to say, why don't we just consider the fact that we could use it where it is with somebody else doing the work and leasing it, and if that's not an appropriate use, we could consider moving it to an alternative site if that's the best solution.
I think we should vote on that after we hear public opinion.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Chairwoman.
Sorry.
I had a really hard time keeping my mouth shut. I hope you're all proud of me. The barn is not a single entity. You can't move that barn and think that you are saving it. It's part and parcel of exactly where it is, with the bridge and with those really beautiful old oak trees. You can't turn that property into a pocket park. For various reasons, I've been doing a lot of research on oak trees and oak woodlands lately, and have just received my certification as a California state naturalist. And those weeds and all that stuff that you see under there, those are very important to the health of the oak. And you can't put grass under there. You can't put playgrounds and stuff, or it's very likely it'll die. That beautiful valley oak, which is on the city side. And there's at least 1 or 2 other kinds of oaks that are actually around the barn itself. I live about a block away from there. I think we have a red-tailed hawk that nests up there. So I really think that you should take the idea of moving that barn kind of off the table. And then in terms of how it might be used once it's reconstructed, I love the idea of a theater, but I'm very, very concerned about the parking situation. I think everybody is really overestimating the amount of parking that's available at Mealy Park. I think the idea of a place for storing some of the large farm equipment that would be open to the public, and people could walk there from the park. To me, as a neighbor and someone living there, and I've been there 20 years, that's a much better use of that property, and maybe you can still have small events there. And if that didn't work out, I think a theater would be okay, but I think you really have to look at the parking situation there. I don't think it's going to be sufficient. Thank you.
Lowell Smith. My memory says when that was created, when the Signorelli subdivision area was created, and this parcel was given to the city as one of the requirements in that subdivision, there was, and this is totally an old 81-year-old memory, probably missing things, $150,000 was also donated to city to do something with that barn. Now, I don't know if the history will, I don't know if we can dig into the history, but I remember Kathy Carrick particularly mentioning that there were funds earmarked in the process of subdividing all those parcels and establishing this for the city. I don't know if it's up to date.
That's what I look.
Have you had any chance to look at the history of that?
I've heard some comments around that, but haven't confirmed any.
Matthew McKell again. About moving the barn, I looked at moving the barn for a private entity that asked me about doing that. Had Walker and Sons come. It's immovable. And it's so tall, you'd have to down power lines to move it any place other than very small distance on that site. But to move it, you'd have to wreck a lot of the siding, trying to attach something that you could lift it to move it. My suggestion, and I guess I'm three people with you, is to take down the siding and reuse it on the facade of a new historical building at the Adams Street property. If the building is large enough for the Historical Society, because you could reuse that whole facade, the interior framing material you could use as interior material in the new building that you build. I know Kevin Horwitz very well, and knowing what he's got to do that building, that price is going to go to about $2 million. And he's going to have to take down the whole building to earthquake-proof it, and to do everything, and then you got to build handicap bathrooms, you got to do the handicap parking, and all the things that encumber with it. If you were to take it down, and I guess I'm a little bit disagreement with a lot of you, is to me you should sell that property for about $500,000 and use it as seed money for the Historical Society building. Thank you.
Well, if we keep this up,
Any other? We're gonna have a lot of nice recycled lumber.
Any more public comments? Okay, we'll close out.
Well, I just want to say one thing, and that is I really appreciate, Mr. McKinley, your advice, because it's so important. I wish you were on this committee, because it's really important to have real working knowledge of, okay, I was just thinking of, we'll move it. I didn't know. I was asking Joshua, can we move it? But after hearing from you, okay, obviously you can't move it. And then that helps understand what are the options, But, see, I agree with the idea that once you take that thing on, it's going to be a couple $1 million to deal with it. Because when I redid the Historical Society, when I redid the Star Building, that was frightening, what I went through, and that was 10 years ago. And that's why nobody wanted to buy it. It took some irrational, somebody, pride of ownership, all that other stuff, And I know construction is scary. What's interesting is, in some ways, I think where this group was put together to figure out how to come up with some bucks to maybe sell something and here and there, and we seem to be spending more money than trying to make money, which is kind of an irony. But I have one thing to say. I went home and read about the Bay Bridge, and when the Bay Bridge was first proposed, it was $250 million, and everyone went, fantastic, let's do it. And then they did a little engineering study, and they came back. After everybody bought off on it, they were sold. We're doing it. We're making a new Bay Bridge. We're going to take that old one down, earthquake, whatever. And then it came back at $1 billion, and it was like, oh, whoa, wait a minute. There was some anger there, and the bureaucrats, and the Caltrans, and Sacramento, and then it turned out that there's $2.5 billion earmarked for all the bridges in California. And thought, okay, so we're going to use one of the 2.5, and we're still got a 1.5 left over for all the other bridges. And then it came to 2, and then Schwarzenegger got involved, and he was so mad. He said, well, the whole Bay Area, they should pay for it. We're not going to pay for it. And then it stalled, and now it's up to $6.5 billion right now. And because it stalled, and everybody underestimated, because everybody had all these spreadsheets, the best engineers, the best accountants, and now it turns out that because they had to save money, they had to ship it out to China, and China cheated everybody on the bolts and the metal. So now they realize to fix all these problems and to pay for the interest and the delay, it's going to be $13 billion for that Bay Bridge. And so we can't kid ourselves when we talk about building stuff, and because it's a runaway train. I mean, if you're smiling because you know.
I would like to suggest that we're in weeds up to our armpits.
Yeah.
And that we develop some language for number 3 and we can have number one as the second alternative. But if the city lists that building with someone to lease or rent, and they want to purpose it for whatever, and I'm sure that if they're good business people, they're going to look into what is it going to cost to repurpose this building. Do I have to have handicap? That maybe they're not going to have bathrooms at all. There are a lot of places where I go to the theater and they don't have bathrooms. Leave it to the contractor to figure out what it is they have to spend, so they can make a sensible proposal to the city, and let's stop wading in the weeds up to our armpits.
So, number 3, let's just start there because that's one most people have talked about. Is everybody saying that goes forward with the language change to reconstruct from rehab?
Yeah, throw grants on there too. Doesn't make sense not to have that as an option for a project like that.
Okay. All in favor of that?
There was also the suggestion to add the word events.
Yeah.
And
I've got events and grants.
Stabilize the building while we explore.
What was
That's a different, to me, that's a different one that gets added to whatever else you decide. I have that as just the number 5 is to do whatever it takes to make it, stabilize it.
Are you asking for a show of hands?
I'm asking for a show of hands on 3 with those language changes. Unanimous. Okay. Now, what about 1? Just by itself?
Well, I have to kind of agree with Mark. I think if the Historical Society wants to do it, that it would have to be safe if they did that as well, because public would be going in and out.
Can we just vote on these? Because I think you've all talked about them, right?
All right.
Yeah, I think we already folded 1 into 3.
Seems like
I mean, it's really the same thing.
Same
That's what
thing,
Joshua
1 and 3.
suggested earlier, and
Yeah.
that's why the word events moved down to number 3, and so
Well,
1 doesn't exist anymore.
okay, I thought you were saying it was a different thing, but you're incorporating that into, okay.
I'm prepared to go home.
What about number 2? Anybody voting yes on number 2? Not even.
Get to
its
live another
proponent.
year, huh, Glenn?
And number 4? Anybody voting yes on number 4? And then the last one was the one to make sure that it is stabilized in some way, no matter what, and do that right away, even if this takes
All
longer.
negotiations take.
Is everybody on?
Yeah.
I'm voting on now, but I'm voting yes.
Okay.
Things get done quickly.
I'm assuming you're done for tonight.
I'm assuming so, too.
So that we get through the fire station.
So the meeting's adjourned, and we'll pick up next week on the,
So next week is really where you're going to focus more on the packages,
well,
right?
we still got properties
Chair
to go
Smithers.
through.
Chair Smithers.
Right.
I believe we may have overlooked item 4.1, the minutes tonight. And
Oh,
we can
you're
postpone
right.
that to, we can carry that over.
Okay,
Or-
thank you.
Okay.
Great idea.
It's hard to do these things without Cindy, you know.
That's not the way to
Are we going to have an updated schedule for the committee meetings?
That was my thought. You know what I'm saying? Just so that
I think we need to look at housing.
I think that